Apparently none of them want to speak.
No.
I do probably been televised already on TV. Yes. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Climate and Environmental Subcommittee meeting. This is the first meeting of this brand new committee, and it's really exciting that this committee has been set up. I would like to welcome the members of this committee, both councillors and non-councillors and iwi. And I would also like to welcome the staff that are supporting this meeting as well as those going forward. I also welcome the members of the public. And I just want to ask whether there's just a double check that there's no one in the public gallery who'd like to speak to any matters on the agenda. Thank you. So just a couple of admin issues. I'd like to ask any councillors to sit around the council table who are not on this committee, which is Councillor Wilson, and also to Kim hasn't been appointed to this committee, but she's very welcome to sit around this table speaking, but without voting rights today, which probably won't be an issue. So the second issue on the point on the agenda is the council blessing, which I will ask Councillor Hanford to give, please.
Kia ora, e a mātou e whiriwhiri ana i ngā take kei mua i o mātou aro, e pono ana mātou ka kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara hua pai mo ngā hapore i mahina i mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa kia whaihua kia tōtika tā mātou mahi, mā te maia te tiro whakamua me te hihiri kataia te arahi I roto I te kotaitanga me te aroha.
Thank you to Councillor Hanford. I haven't received any apologies for this meeting, but I'm just wondering whether there are any apologies to bring forward. Thank you. The next item is to ask if there's any declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. Thank you. As I haven't been provided a list of any people wishing to speak to items on the agenda, we'll move on to members' business, which is item 6. So are there any leave of absence requests, please? Thank you. Are there any matters of an urgent nature to bring to this committee? To this meeting, I've had one, and if Mr. Moore would like to just briefly outline, actually, if I can just ask whether we go through that now or do it later. I think it would be good if he's comfortable, we do it later. Okay. So I'll just highlight that we have a matter of an urgent nature brought by Waikanae Ward member Mr. Moore. We'll speak to that item later in the agenda. Thank you. So now we will move on to updates. The first one is the Taikata Kapiti project. Who's speaking to that? Jason, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. In your own time.
Madam Chair, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for making the time on what is the first of this committee's meetings. Quite an honour actually to be able to take this slot. Before I go on any further, I'd like to introduce Abby Morris. Abby Morris is the Coastal Project Manager. Abby's going to be looking after the Community Assessment Panel, the Taikatai Kapiti process. And look, it's great to have Abby on board in this role. So Abby will be also speaking at various times during what will be just a reasonably short verbal update that we're giving today. So we're not seeking any decisions or anything like that. It's an opportunity to bring you up to speed with a really significant part of Council's work this triennium, looking at coastal issues and having the Community Assessment Panel providing recommendations to Council will be a massive part of this triennium. So we wanted to get in early, give you a briefing, first of many conversations that we'll be having on this topic through the triennium. So we might just wind our way back to the first slide, if that's okay. Thanks very much. So Takatai Kapiti, I imagine that there will be a range of kind of levels of understanding about what is Takatai Kapiti. So let's start with an overall summary of what it's about. So it's a coastal adaptation project to ultimately guide the community's response to climate change and the associated sea level rise that we anticipate that will come with that, and the effects of that on the Kapiti coastline. This is obviously a global issue, it's a national issue, it's a regional issue, but of course also it's a district-wide level issue. The project is in part about raising awareness around the district of the impacts of coastal hazard risks. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Not a problem.
Go back to slide 2.
You click back on the click on.
Oh yeah, I can try to drive if you like. You might have the answer.
The technology's not playing.
It's okay. Good as gold. So yeah, look, with these things, it's always really important to bring everybody on the journey with us. And so raising awareness of the issues and also how the science is suggesting actually there's going to be a different level of impact in different parts of the district. And so we need to be able to bring everybody along on the journey, all of the communities of the district. And so this is a major part of the Takatai Kapiti process. And the independent panel, and I'll talk a bit more about who they are and how they're going to go about their business shortly, is going to be looking to facilitate community input into their work. So it's not just about projecting information, it's not about one-way information projection. This is a two-way conversation. What the community is going to be telling the panel is going to be incredibly vital to inform what their recommendations back to Council are. And so that's going to be really leading to the development of meaningful recommendations. Actual, what are we going to do about this challenge? So it's not just about getting an idea of what the scale of the issue is. Of course, that's important, but really it's going to be about what are we going to do about it. So this is a pretty busy slide, but it tells a bit of a story about what's happened so far, and I will be talking soon about what's coming up because that's going to be the key thing for Council this triennium. But there's been a lot of work in this space, and it did, in a way, it started, you could say, in 2019 when Council declared a climate emergency. And that was a real statement to say we've got to do something about this thing. This is real, and we're going to need to find out some answers to this problem. When it comes to shaping up what the Takatai Kapiti process would look like, there was a lot of work that went on, and it was a working group that informed this to figure out things like what should this independent panel look like and what should their kind of scope of work be. So there was a lot of conversations. We involved iwi in those conversations. We also involved a number of groups who'd been working with Council over a number of years on what to do about the coastal hazard issue particularly. So there's a couple of names up there: North Otaki Beach Residents Group and Coastal Ratepayers United. Both groups have had a lot of involvement with council over a long period of time, talking with us about what's the best way forward with coastal issues, because there is a history in this district with coastal issues, and at times a very difficult history. So a lot of this process that we're embarking on is about learning from what we've tried in the past and doing a better job this time. And working with these groups is a big part of that. There was a major event which many of you might recall. It was up in Otaki. It was in 2020, and it was called a climate summit, and it was a big public event, and it was a chance to really start saying, hey, we're going to be working on this thing. We're going to be working with you, the community. It was a nice event. And it had a really good turnout, actually, many hundreds of people there, and all demographics, the young and the more experienced. It was great. So eventually we got to a point where the working group gave its recommendations to council about what this Takatai Kapiti thing should look like. And once that happened, we started the process of actually recruiting members of the panel, and we're very fortunate that in April of 2021, the Right Honourable Jim Bolger was appointed as the chair of the independent Takatai Kapiti panel. Over the coming months after that, we added members to the panel. Our first iwi reps were appointed to the panel, and we're actually still working and making some really good progress in recent times with our other iwi partners, so that we really have that full representation that we need, because iwi involvement in this process is absolutely pivotal to making it a success. Early in 2022, the Jacobs reports were finalised and made available, and these reports are really, really important as kind of the technical underpinning from which we can start to have conversations about the scale of the issue and what we're going to do about it. So these are called the Jacobs reports, and you're going to hear more about the Jacobs reports, I'm sure, over the course of this triennium. And then throughout 2022, the panel really started to get their head around the issue and also did a lot of community engagement. And towards the end of the year, up in Otaki, we started our first more targeted engagement in what's called the Northern Adaptation Area. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we've broken up the district into different areas as part of Takatai Kapiti. So the CAP, the Coastal Advisory Panel, that's what CAP stands for. I talked a bit about how it has a range of different members on it. The purpose of the CAP and the work that it's going to undertake is laid out up there on the slide, and there is a terms of reference which is on the website and is available for everybody to see. And as I've said, it's about bringing in the community voice to make sure that we have that community voice front and centre when council is making decisions ultimately about what to do about this major challenge that we all face. It's about developing options over a number of timeframes, and so this is something that many communities throughout the country are grappling with. Is how do we deal with the change that we're all anticipating, unfortunately, is going to have to be dealt with over the short term, 30 years, sort of medium term, 30 plus years, and all the way out, as the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement requires us to do, all the way out to a 100-year time frame and beyond. And ultimately, the panel will be coming to council with a suite of recommendations about what to do in different parts of the district over different time frames. A major piece of work. So I mentioned that this is a district-wide, region-wide, national, global issue. Even within the district scale, there is real differences. I mean, you know your district. and you know that we are a series of diverse communities, and even within our district, geographically, many other variables, so much variability along our coastline. So we've broken up, recognising that, we've broken up the coastline into a number of areas. The northern area, as you can see up there, down to about Peka Peka, just south of, and then the central area just to below Parapara Beach, Raumati, then Queen Elizabeth Park with its unique features gets a treatment of its own, and then Pai Kakariki, which is of course a unique part of our district in many respects, and in terms of how do we deal with this climate issue that way as well. Just a brief mention of kind of where the project is managed within council, in case you were interested. So because coastal solutions are ultimately going to be actually touching on a number of different parts of council, we've actually shared the ownership or the management, if you like, of supporting the panel within council in two different places. We've had the benefit of the experience of the infrastructure group, which has managed the project up until recently. There's good reason for the infrastructure group to be intimately involved, and as they will continue to be with supporting the panel, because of course there is an aspect of, particularly in the short term, of the response to climate change, which is of an infrastructure type nature. So we need infrastructure to be deeply involved in, and they will continue to be deeply involved. But there's also a district planning response to this. District planning is a lot about managing land use, and that includes land use in vulnerable parts of our district. And so ultimately Takatoi Kapiti and its recommendations will inform a plan change, which will occur after Takatoi Kapiti and informed by Takatoi Kapiti. And so now, in recent times, the management of the project has been brought across into the strategy and growth group, and under, I guess, my team, district planning, and managed by Abby, who I've introduced you to just previously. So this is the exciting stuff. This is what's coming up, and by crikey, we have a lot of work ahead of us to support the panel. The panel are going to be busy bees over the next 16 months or so. So essentially, what I'd like to do with this slide is actually start at the bottom, because we've got a milestone that we're looking to assist the panel to achieve, and that is that they provide their recommendations to council sometime around late May 2024. Now that might seem like a reasonable length of time away, but rest assured there is a lot to do between now and then, and it has to be done well. It has to be done well technically, and it has to be done well in terms of community engagement. And so for that reason, I would view that date as a challenging milestone that we are incredibly dedicated to support the panel to achieve, but a challenging milestone it remains. And so our way of assisting the panel to achieve that is by breaking up, as I've said, the coastline into 5 areas, and then in each of those areas going through about a 3-month cycle approximately. And in that cycle we'll be working out with the community what's important to them, what are some options that they have in front of them, and what a preferred set of options might look like. It's a lot of work to get done in each of those areas, and you can see there that we're essentially going from north to south. We're in north coming up at the moment, and then we'll be working our way down. Of course, you'll see Queen Elizabeth Park slightly breaks the mould there, and it's south of Pai. Oh, in the slide, it's south of Pai Kakariki, but actually it's a little bit north. But generally speaking, it's a north to south migration. we will be having engagement events, and we'll be working closely with our comms team to support the panel to get the news out there that things are happening, and the opportunity is there to have their say. And then, as I said, we'll look forward to that big day when those recommendations will be brought back to Council for their consideration, your consideration. Now, one of the biggest things that we have to do, of course, is bringing the community into this project and along the journey with this project. We also have to make sure that you as council are always knowing what's coming up, what's going on. And so we have talked with the Right Honourable Jim Baldwin, and he is equally keen as we are to have him coming along and giving you regular project updates. So sort of watch that space in terms of the exact program for when that will happen, but yeah, that will be a very good way for you to kind of see what's happening with the project and make sure that you know what's going on. Thank you. So look, if there's any questions, Abby and I would be very, very happy to answer them.
Thank you, Jason. So do any members have any questions of Jason and or Abby? Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Jason. Has all those iwi positions been filled? Oh, if so, when were they filled?
Yeah, if you want to.
Tēnā koutou katoa. We're going to be a bit of playing with the microphone for me to get the right distance. Currently we have got Atiawa on board as of last week, so we're very excited to have that in the project. Ngā hapu o Otaki, they are going to be reviewing some of their members because when they were appointed in 2021, situations have changed. Their CAP members that were appointed, new projects have gone on, and then we're going to be talking to Ngāti Toa shortly about getting their CAP engagement for the project.
So, am I right in saying it was launched in 2020? We're now 2003 and there hasn't been arguably meaningful iwi involvement up until this point?
Part of this change within the part of the council, we've been able to secure funding for iwi, as iwi is incredibly short. They've got so much going on, they need to have funding. We've been able to sign over that they've got funding to be able to enjoy, and not enjoy, but hopefully enjoy, but join the project.
So with that in mind, is there a risk that the work that's been done up until this point, 3 years worth of work, will lack credibility in terms of partnership and our commitment to the Treaty Waitangi?
Okay.
Honestly, Councillor, I think iwi need to be the judge of that and not us. What we have done so far is we've done technical science work. We are looking forward to the finalisation of cultural values reports, which will add yet another thread of really important evidence that the panel can draw on to inform their recommendations. So there is work to be done, but we are very happy to say that in the last month or two even, we feel like we've made significant progress and that the conversations with iwi are at the moment really, really healthy. So it's a positive sign for the future.
Awesome. My only concern would be that we are going to the Northern Block for feedback and consultation with the community without any real meaningful input from iwi at this point. But is what it is, isn't it, I suppose? But it would be a concern from a governance point of view, and I would have thought.
Yeah, as I said, iwi involvement is absolutely pivotal to this project in terms of it having meaning, really. But look, we're working really, really well with our partners, and I am sure that where there are concerns about the project, we will hear about those as we go. But now that we're actually getting the relationships closer and we are actually doing our best to help with the capacity, we're giving that a chance now. So it's looking good.
Great, thank you. Just two more questions. So there's been some friction between the Coastal Ratepayers Union crew and CAPS. And not that I wish to speak on their behalf, but they don't feel like their group is being heard or able to be heard. Is that relationship advancing, or how's it looking now with the new triennium?
So yeah, there was a slide a bit earlier about the working group that we formed to shape Takatoa Kapiti, and we extended, and the Coastal Ratepayers United did get involved in that working group. I'll be catching up with them actually next week. So if that's a sign that at least there's conversations going on, and that there's an openness to listen, and hopefully that is a sign of that. And we'll continue to reach out and offer opportunities, and ultimately it'll be up to those parties to decide whether they want to take them or not.
Great, thank you. One last question. With what we're seeing around the country and with the flooding in Nelson recently, now Auckland, and the short to medium impacts of climate change, which is not sea level rise, but inundation from weather events. Has there been any talk around CAPS pivoting to including not the coastal management, not just inundation, but flood issues? Or is that being kept completely separate? Or are we able to pivot and include that? Because I think it's quite related.
Yeah, I guess the other thing you would have got from that slide is it took a long time to get that terms of reference right. And we've got a lot of work to do in a reasonably short space of time already. So scope and managing scope is going to be an important part of making sure that this project actually lands in a timely way. That said, it's always a bit of a fuzzy line. Coastal inundation and flooding, the reality is water doesn't stop at arbitrary lines. So we have and will continue to support the CAP and the community to understand the various bits of technical work going on at the moment. We do have a review of our flood hazard maps extents going on at the same time, and we are working to make sure that the technical work across the different projects is talking to each other. I mean, ultimately, we're going to be looking at a district plan change or changes, progressing at somewhat about the same time, dealing with hazards. And we've got to make sure that the solutions we put out at that point are integrated technically, but also from a policy point of view, don't have unnecessary variation just because there's some arbitrary line that has been put for a scope reason. So very mindful of the need for integration.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Cheers.
Sorry, Councillor Cooper. Thank you, Jason. I think Mr. Mellon may also have some comments to make. Can mine stay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason's pretty much covered off most of what I was going to say, really. It's that, so stormwater flood hazard mapping, that work's been going on for the last 12 to 18 months. But we've been, and one of the reasons why I guess that infrastructure element on the slide previously was sitting within our area has allowed, I guess, some more detailed coordination across the flood hazard mapping with the coastal work that Jacobs has been doing. So they are both running in parallel at the moment, and you'll be seeing, we'll be coming to talk to you about the stormwater flood hazard mapping work and the program associated with that. leading into, as Jason's mentioned, the potential plan change associated with that. So very closely connected, and we've been working together really on those for the last year.
Thank you, Mr. Mellon. Councillor Warwick.
With regard to the work programs, and the first one up is Northern, which is our neck of the woods. Is the community board going to be briefed on this? We've got a meeting at the beginning of March, which is when the engagement starts. So
Sounds like a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be working on a comms plan leading up to our community engagement. The next one that will happen in Otaki. That sounds like a brilliant part of a comms plan for that. Yes, we have actually had an engagement in September already, that's right. But yeah, with the next one to come, I think that's a great suggestion.
it would be nice for the community board to know what's going on before
Thank you to Councillor Warwick. Councillor Coe. I think.
Just through you, Madam Chair, in the past there has been some controversy around the technical and scientific input to these kind of decisions. And I just would like to ask if you can give us some reassurance around the level of expertise that is going into this, and being able to tap into a range of diverse opinions as to what is actually happening on our coastlines or likely to happen going down the track. Because, I know in past times we've had like views that have been completely contradictory in terms of what's happening on our coastline. So how is that issue being addressed? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to answer that question, actually, because it's a very important one. Particularly with the district plan hat on, looking to the future, very aware both of the past, because there is a history in this district of a difficult planning process. And we learnt some lessons from that, both in terms of, I think, the robustness that's needed for technical assessment, but also the thoroughness of engagement that we need to do on these matters. So when it comes to Jacobs, very comfortable to recommend to you that they are a highly respected technical science outfit who has done this work around the country, who has experienced people who know their stuff. Their work to date has also been peer reviewed by other people who I could just say exactly the same words about, but are independent of Jacobs. I believe it was Becker from memory who was the company who peer reviewed their work. Now we have, and yes, Greater Wellington as well, thank you, who have their own experts in this field. Now we have also had feedback on it from parties such as Coastal Ratepayers United, and that feedback has been considered. While the report was in draft form, it was reviewed with that feedback in mind. So there has been an open mind to receiving feedback on the work so far, and we are very confident that it is the best available information, that we've learnt from previous experiences, and that this is the best product that you could expect to have to base this on.
Thanks.
Christian Judge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report and all the work that goes into it. Just a few points. I know we're early in we're partway through the whole process. This is multi-year. Is relative sea level rise being taken into account? Because that methodology came out sort of probably a bit after the Jacobs had done their work from the NZ Sea Rise tool. Will that, I'm sure you know about the NZ Sea Rise tool. So is that going to be taken into account going forwards?
Yeah, I have to say, as a district planning manager, you might be surprised what I don't know. And sometimes the technical underpinnings of things isn't actually what I'm all over the top of. So I think we probably have to come back to you on that question, Sean. I'm not sure whether that level of technical...
Sorry, I didn't hear
So the NZ Sea Rise tool takes into account, yes, sea level rise, and nets it off with ground movement. Yeah. So you've got that. Okay.
Great, thank you, Sean.
Thing to say there. Also, on the subject you just canvassed there, will the I understand there's various bits of legislation moving through Parliament at the moment, and some of that includes articles around good faith provisions for councils to give their best advice to ratepayers and to publish that and to act on that in good faith, so that it doesn't stop councils from acting in good faith just because someone comes along with their own worldview and their own version of science that is important to them for their own reasons, and I can see that, but it does allow you to actually get on in acting in good faith. And if you're aware of those provisions, do you think that they offer some legal protection against liability for the council for publishing things, say, on limbs?
Right, I see. Thanks for those last couple of words, because now I think I do know which provisions you're talking about. So yes, there's been, or there is currently, I think, consultation, isn't there, on amending the Local Government and Official Meetings Act, which we have provided some feedback on or are about to. Thank you. Which I think our submission was overall quite positive about. So they seem like good changes on the whole. When it comes to limbs, we do at the moment have acknowledgement on limbs that the Jacobs report exists, and people who get a limb are able to therefore access that report and view it themselves. So that's the state of play in terms of limbs at the moment when it comes to this work. I mean, obviously, as this project evolves and it ultimately turns into or informs a future plan change, then there will be other notations that need to be added to limbs as that time comes. But we're a long way away from that point at this stage.
Okay. The other thing, a couple of the things I've got on here is you've sort of mentioned you need to draw a line somewhere, because I'm also concerned about estuary impacts and the impacts upstream from that on pluvial flooding, and it seems as though there's work going on in there, because as a rule of thumb, and I don't know what this means for our district, but it's about 10 to 1 homes at risk inland compared to coastal inundation, which in no way diminishes the importance of doing work on coastal hazards. But inland flooding is typically a much bigger problem, and if you look at what's happened in Auckland, in Nelson, and even when you look at Westport, the water that was in the houses came from inland, and the sea stopped it from getting out. Had a part to play there. In Auckland, the sea didn't necessarily stop it from getting out. It's just the intensity and the capacity of stormwater systems there. And my last point is, along the way, are you sort of involved in national science programs such as the Resilience Challenge? Those sorts of things that are operated through NIWA and the Deep South Challenge and the national science funding programs.
Yeah, we certainly do keep an eye on developments nationally. That's critical. Particularly for a multi-year project like this, things change from year to year. Assumptions change, and it can be quite a challenge to be able to keep everything up to date with those things. And sometimes, that does make for some difficult decisions that have to be made, because of course, if you're continually reviewing everything all the time, you never actually stand still long enough to be able to make some kind of useful progress about what are you going to do about this thing. So there's always a bit of a balancing act about that, but we absolutely do plug into, obviously staff are attending conferences, and at a regional level, Brandy would speak and Ninka could speak to the work that's done with the the regional group on this issue. So we are plugged into national, regional forums, regularly attending those things.
Okay. I'm sorry, just one final point. Somewhere along the line, the topic of managed retreats will have to be at least thought of. And the precursor to having those discussions is having the discussion about what processes you would put in place so you can talk about managed retreat. Because if you turn up and say, we've decided to retreat, that's not going to go well. So I don't want to, clearly I can't preempt what's going to be in the CAP report in X months' time, but is Council more broadly looking at working on how to think about managed retreat, how to start that conversation so that there can be a process put together, so when a community is identified where that discussion might have to be had, there is something to take to that community to say, we're at the beginning of a process, this is how we need to think about it, this is how we can proceed with the conversation. Is there anything like that in the pipeline?
So managed retreat is one of the options that the CAP will be exploring, but at the same time we'll be looking at dune restoration, what happens if we don't do anything, seawalls.
Sure.
And so part of the program is that we'll be coming back and sharing more of the steps that we will be taking. Is every time we go to the community, one that has already happened last year in Otaki, as we go to the community, hear the voices of the community, what's important to them, what is things that they are seeing as a concern. We go then through the steps with the CAPs. They look into like a risk assessment, they'll look into scoring what's a realistic pathway to approach these risks. And then once we've done that and looking at it also a cost that'll to the community, we'll go back to the community with the presentation of what CAP is suggesting. So there's going to be multiple options throughout this program where we will be talking at options. So it's managed retreat will be discussed. We're not avoiding it, but we're also not saying that at this stage that is the only option. That will be up to the CAP to determine.
Sorry, thank you for that answer. The question was more about, I understand the place of managed retreat at the end of the queue of all the possible adaptive responses that you could put forward, physical, natural, and then you get to, it's not cost effective, it's not practical, it's not possible to ameliorate this hazard, take away the risk to an acceptable level for that community. Therefore, for their own safety, principally, they're going to have to, moving is the sensible thing to do. It's developing a framework to take that conversation to the community, and because if you just rock up and say, right, we've done the numbers, we can't defend you, you're going to have to go. That's just going to be awful, and it's having that process, and it might be that I don't know where that's going to go. Sorry, instead of that.
Okay, that's
Thank you.
So thank you, and if I can just maybe remind elected members that it's good to have a little bit of conversation and some questions to start off the process. So I actually have some questions, and actually no, Councillor Wilson has some questions.
Just a couple of reasonably
or
quick
some
ones.
comments maybe.
So not particularly conversant with the Jacobs report, but it has in there, are they addressing seawalls and yes, no to seawalls? We've got there are members of the Paikakurihi Community Board who weren't yet born when the current seawall proposal had its first iteration. So that community is obviously quite exercised about this and has been for some time. So if the Jacobs report comes back and says yes, no to the seawall, is that kind of like a stop-start, particularly if they say no, notwithstanding what you're talking about with this sea rise tool and what impact that might have? So that's question one.
Good opportunity for me to maybe clarify a few things. So the Jacobs report is a technical assessment. It's not saying yes or no. It's not even looking at options. That's not what volumes 1 and 2 of the Jacobs report are about. So volume 1 is essentially describing the methodology, the technical methodology that they followed, to kind of set out spatially what sea level rise might look like under different scenarios. Those scenarios are essentially different bundles of assumptions that if you play them out in a model over a period of time, lead to different situations occurring in terms of particularly coastal erosion. So really, they're technical reports. They're not the answer. They're not even trying, in terms of volume 1 or 2 that are out there at the moment, they're not trying to say what the solution should be. That they're actually just helping people to understand under different scenarios what might happen. They're not even getting into things beyond that spatial appearance that would be created if those different bundles of assumptions played out.
Next question is it strikes me that there has been a significant disengagement on the part of Takutai Kapiti with Crew, and given that Crew were one of the major players that you were talking about, has that relationship, is it working? Are people talk, because there was a point there not very long ago where they just would not talk to each other, simple as that. At the recent Crew AGM, it was really clear there was just no communication at all, and given the relative importance, so is that are there steps to address that?
Well, I think as I answered Councillor Cooper's question, I'm meeting with Crew next week. We will continue to offer opportunities. It will be up to Crew to decide whether to take those or not. But I'll be listening next week, and I'm sure that won't be the last time I catch up with them during the process.
And my final question, you'll be pleased to hear. I know Takutai Kapiti is specifically looking at coastal hazards, etc. But as Christian's pointed out, and anybody with a basic science degree will tell you that Kapiti's, just have a look at the LIDAR. Inland flooding is that's our big one. So, given all of the time, the resources, etc., that have gone into a coastal strategy, how much time, resources, etc., are we looking to put into what looks like being the 90% problem as opposed to the 10% problem? You don't have to give a specific answer to that because you might not have had that conversation yet, but I'm assuming that conversation's going to be had sooner rather than later.
Well, considerable is the answer. I guess it's kind of helpful just to think a little bit about we're coming from kind of two different historical places with, if you like, the inland issues and the coastal issues. When it comes to just looking at the district plan at the moment, it's probably the easiest way to explain this. We've actually got flood hazard provisions in the district plan already. We have mapped areas of different kinds of flood hazard risks laid out in the district plan maps, and we have different rules, objectives and policies that, depending on which of those sort of hazard areas a property might fall in, dictates the extent to which development can occur. So the place we're coming from with that sort of inland issue is actually we've got some things that need to be reviewed, and I'm sure they've got room for improvement, but we've got something that's relatively modern. Relative to most district plans around the country, they're not bad. The coastal history is a different history. We have, at the moment, coastal hazard provisions that are 24 years old. And that is because during the process of the development of the district plan we have now, the coastal hazard provisions needed to be withdrawn, or that was a decision that council made back in 2014 and 17, withdrawn in two different sections. So we've got 24-year-old coastal hazard provisions and a difficult history. And so the idea with Takatai Kapiti was always about recognising that history, recognising we need to do things differently, particularly in the coastal space. And that's why the terms of reference for Takatai Kapiti is very much focused on that coastal space. But as has been quite rightly pointed out around the table, our role as officers is to make sure that we take an integrated approach. There is no line in reality. And so we need to make sure that we are both progressing that update of the flood hazard maps, the review of those provisions to make sure they are best practice, with progressing support for Takatai Kapiti to make sure that they bring recommendations that the council can implement confidently. So as you can tell, complicated world we live in, we are doing our best to do the integrating, and that's a constant thing we need to be doing over the next few years.
Yes. Thank you, Jason. So I think Mr. Millen may also like to add more or a little bit more.
Madam Chair, I just, in terms of the, I guess the relative scale of that, I think reference to the investment in that stormwater flooding hazard mapping that the district has made. I think the first round of flood hazard mapping work we did was 2004. There was another iteration of that 2011, 2012. The current work we're doing, I think we started 2019-20. So there's substantial work already been done in that space. As Jason's mentioned, Kapiti, I think, was probably one of the first councils to do as much work in that flood hazard mapping space. And at the moment, I think about 6,500 properties across the district have some form of flood hazard associated with their property. And I think the coastal, I guess that gives you an indication as to the scale. And as some of the councillors would know, we have currently, I think it's about $253 million set aside to invest in mitigating some of that flood hazard mapping, flood hazard from a council infrastructure perspective over the next 20 to 30 years. So there certainly has been and is and continues to be a significant amount of investment into that area. And we'll be coming back to give you a more comprehensive briefing on the flood hazard mapping update process and the work that's going to be leading into a plan change that will come off the back of that.
Thank you, Mr. Mellon. So I actually have a number of questions, and I appreciate the questions that have come from, or the comments that have also come from the members. And I know it's this topic that's not particularly front of house for a lot of people, and I thought it was good to have some understanding or develop some understanding. So I suppose my questions are sort of all over the place, but my first question is, I attended what I thought was actually the Northern meeting in September last year, but I see that there's another one planned for May this year. Is that actually the same one?
So part of that May one, things are shifting because the project did go on hold for a few months. So we're having to rework the work program to still hit the same deadline of 24th of May 2024. So we will be releasing an upcoming schedule publicly, and we're happy to put that in the elected members bulletin as well, so you're aware of that. But there has been one initial community engagement. That's where we went out and got the values to understand was important to the community. We will be going back out to Otaki again to go, we've heard from you, this is what we're proposing to do.
Right, so the values are different from the next
Okay,
step.
So we've got values, you go, what's important? We might have, there's the Rokawa Marae. We want to make sure that's too far inland, but that's an example. We've got wahi tapus throughout the district that are in the adaptation area. So it's making sure we're hearing that as from iwi that's protected. We also know that a lot of people in Otaki like fishing. So it's understanding that they want to be able to still have accesses to their beaches. So we've got to understand what is important before we can come up with options. So what the next 3 CAP meetings will be to going through what's important, understanding the risk assessment. So that's going, what happens if we don't do anything, options to look at it. We will then look at options with pathways to go. Seawall, managed retreat, dune restoration, just as pure examples. And then we will be going and looking at the costs for that. And once we've got all that package, the CAP has determined that, we will then go back out to Otaki to go, this is what we are proposing. What are your thoughts? So there's options to give their feedback before we do a final big wrap up of the whole district.
So just to lay with the point, why is Otaki being visited a number of times as opposed to other parts of the district?
They will all be visited
Right. Okay.
equally throughout the
Okay,
district.
yeah. Thank you. So I know that managed retreat has been mentioned a number of times. So is it the role of CAP to identify, whether managed retreat is one of the options, and to come up with how you actually do that, or is that actually up to council to do that if that is where we end up?
Okay, so part of CAP, that is to make it independent from council. They're going to be hearing the community. With the CAP, we do have a team of experts to help advise and support the CAP in making these decisions. So that one of them is Jacobs. So part of that, this will be the recommendations going to council of what to do from the CAP. There will then also be the next steps going forward, what is realistic, and it's also going to be council's decision to accept or reject the recommendations report.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Jason, for giving us some time frames around this is going to be completed by May next year. I suppose this is my second term as a councillor, but I have to admit at times I've struggled as to where CAP, I suppose how they're working, how the meetings they're having. They haven't actually been to council that often, and it's great that you're coming along here, but it's also really important that we hear directly from them as well. And I suppose also too, there've been a few questions around crew and CAP, but I suppose I'm interested to know how you're operating. I'm not sure whether you're operating as an intermediary between community groups and CAP, or how that works rather than those community groups meeting directly with CAP.
Okay, so as this Takata Kapiti process has got to be independent from council, CAP members will be the ones meeting with the community groups. The role of council through this project is to support the CAP members.
If I just clarify.
Okay.
In addition, nothing that Abby said was wrong, but in addition, I get approached to have meetings, and I meet with anybody who approaches me.
Okay, thank you. So it's a case of where if community groups spoke to CAP about having a meeting with them, they would be considered as well. Okay, thank you. So I suppose then, in terms of how, just for my understanding and for other members around the table, CAP, obviously they have meetings and they have their panel. Are there, how do they work, and are there observers, for example, that go along to these meetings? Are the meetings minuted? Are they publicly available?
Yeah.
So part of the project is transparency. So every time we going to have a CAP meeting or a CAP workshop, we will release the agenda publicly on the Takata Kapiti website. And once we have done that workshop meeting, then the extensive information is released through minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So I suppose there's a number of things that are going on. We've got this process. We've got Plan Change 2 going through. We've got the district plan. So how do these all work together when, particularly when some of this information will, not be available for some time, but in the meantime, some of these other decisions, particularly along the coastal strip, will be made?
Yeah, that very issue was one that we actually raised as a council when the amendments were being put through to the RMA around intensification in late 2021. We actually, as a council, you said that it was quite problematic for us that we were going to be working with the community on how do we react to climate change and sea level rise. And in the meantime, they put in a blanket bill that was at face value at the time looking like it was going to be compelling council to intensify all the way up to the edge of the coast in any residential zoned area. So we raised that issue. We raised the issue as a council in the submission that it could force us to act in a plan change way ahead of when we wanted to, which was going to be only after we worked with the community through Takatai Kapiti to kind of figure out what was the holistic answer to this challenge. So council was very aware of that challenge. In the end, what council did when it approved notification of plan change 2, the intensification plan change, was it actually agreed to include in that proposed plan change what's called a coastal qualifying matter. And so a qualifying matter, for those of you who haven't had the joy of sitting through many plan change 2 discussions, is basically it's a reason that government said is an okay reason for not letting their intensification drive occur on a particular site or area. And one of the reasons in the legislation in the end that they did say was okay as a reason not to allow that intensification to occur was in relation to things like natural hazards or the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. They gave a range of reasons. Those were a couple. And so we drew on that reasoning to include a coastal qualifying matter, which was based on the Jacobs report and one of the scenarios in it, to just hold the line and not let that intensification roll all the way up to the coast everywhere straight away. And that we were very open as a council about that was not necessarily the final answer at all. In fact, it wasn't intended to be council's response to the coastal hazard challenge, but it was saying, hey, we needed to do something about not letting intensification just roll on everywhere. Because that would have gotten in the way potentially of a better answer to coastal hazards after Takatai Kapiti. So yeah, we did something the best we could.
Thank you. So I suppose, what does that actually mean on the ground?
Yeah, well what it means is that the government's 3-by-3-story directive that applies generally across the general residential zone does not apply in an area close to the coast, which is set out in our district plan maps and is called the Coastal Qualifying Matter Precinct.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. So my one last question is, it's relating to, I suppose, the reports that Jacobs have provided. And so it's my understanding that in the contract, it was actually requesting a risk assessment, whereas a susceptibility and vulnerability report was written. Is that correct? And I'm just wondering why, if there is a difference in those two.
So there is
And
a
what that
range
means.
there's a range of work going on still to build on volumes 1 and 2. Volumes 1 and 2 were never intended to be the end of the story when it comes to the evidence that was needed to support the CAP in their work and council in their future decisions. There was always going to need to be extra work, and that work is ongoing. Abby, I'm not sure if you wanted to add any further to that, but.
Okay, so I suppose I think there was quite a sizable amount of money that was given in that contract. Does that mean that that contract has been extended, or it's all wrapped up into that one contract?
Ooh, contracts.
I think it's about $250,000.
Yeah, like I just don't have those figures in front of me at the moment, but
I
Sean.
think yes, Mr. Mellon.
Yeah, I think, I'm happy to provide follow-up specifically on those questions. Those questions have been raised a number of times, both around the council table. I think we've had a couple of workshops on them, and there may have been some formal responses provided both externally and internally on that specific issue. So if the chair would like, I can certainly make those available to you offline, and happy to answer any questions that they may generate.
I appreciate that, Mr. Mellon. I can send them out to those members of this subcommittee who wish to see them. So yes, I think that's the end of my questions on this really interesting topic, and I appreciate Jason and Abby for coming along and presenting it to us, and for the support from Mr. Miller. So we'll now move on to item 8 that is on our agenda, and this is the Climate Emergency Action Report update from Brandy Griffin. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for receiving our report and having us here today. It's been a pleasure to provide this update to you. We wanted to take the report in general as read, but there were 3 comments that we wanted to make. Because this is the first time we've had an opportunity to meet with you, we wanted to provide a pretty thorough overview on the state of the Cross-Council Climate Change Work Program. It is important to understand that within the last triennium, a decision was made to embed climate change as much as possible throughout all of the activities in council. So that's why you find that your collective climate change strategy, so to say, is embedded in different documents. And I also wanted to emphasize climate change impacts all 4 well-beings. It is much bigger than just the environment. The long-term impacts can be significant, which is why you'll see that we've added a recommendation related to providing the report to other elected members as well. So with that, we are more than happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have.
So are there any questions or comments from members of the subcommittee? Councillor Coe.
Thank you. Yes, look, I obviously wasn't here when the plan was adopted. I'm just wondering if there may be an opportunity to revise the plan in some kind of a forum. My major concern with what I see in front of me is in the area of engagement with the public on this issue, and what we're doing in that regard to increase public awareness of what we need to do and to inform members of the public as to what steps they can take to help achieve our goals and objectives. So, and I think, my reading of this is there's a bit of a gap in that aspect. So what can we do to, or is there an opportunity to review that and look at filling that gap in some way? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that comment. 2 things to think about. In terms of making significant changes to the plan or to the work program, that is something that you do through the long-term plan, through the annual plan. And as you know, as we start to lead up into the next long-term plan, I understand that Chris and her strategic team will be working with you to talk about how we incorporate that in and what happens there. You'll notice that we had in year 2 of the long-term plan, so that's just this year, we have just hired a new sustainability educator for communities because we recognize that that was something that was very important to provide. Due to funding constraints, we were not able to do that until this financial year. But also I did want to point out that if you look at the table in attachment 2, where I start to summarize a little bit about some of the things that do take place with the community, for our communications team, this is a significant issue area, and they are constantly producing a range of updates on what we're doing, what's available, any programs that are happening. I'm certain over time we would be more than happy to have some conversations about, is it not getting wide enough traction? What more can we do to improve those areas? I'm sure Ninka might like to add to this, but one of the first things that our new sustainability educator will do is do a broad overview of where he thinks the first focus should be. One of his initial thoughts is it relates to business in particular. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do want to add, when we're looking at dealing with climate change, we are looking at the adaptation side as well as the mitigation side. And when you then look at the grassroots level, this council has done extensive programs for a long time already. For example, everything we do in waste minimization helps people reduce their waste footprint in-house. When we look at our sustainable transport strategy, it's as summarized is here. Every shared path, every cycleway you provide helps people choose other choices than driving their cars. And now that Rob Dunn has started just before Christmas, literally the week before Christmas, so he's just on the way. We're developing a climate change action fund, which is a little bit similar to the waste levy grants we're giving. So that program will get on the way later this financial year and come back to this committee very likely as well in draft form shortly. And then Rob's first focus has been to tap into the sustainable businesses network that we've just developed here, because the businesses that have become members have come back to council asking for support, certain types of support, so that we're in the middle of that discussion to actually go back to business and say, what is the most useful thing for you next to that climate change fund. And then we're promoting the outdoor bikes challenge, so I can assure you this new person is very busy at the moment straight away. Because there's a lot to do, and it's true. We have, this is on top of tools we already provide on our website, which has all kinds of tips and tricks on how you can act on climate change yourself within your group or your family or your community.
I think when I looked at those, they are kind of buried a little bit in the website. But I think, you know, what struck me during the campaign process was the importance of this issue amongst the public, and perhaps there's a lack of awareness of what council is actually doing, and certainly a lack of awareness amongst people about what they as individuals can do, and I perceive also a lack of sense of urgency or emergency. You know, we've declared an emergency, but it doesn't feel like an emergency. It feels like business as usual, but with perhaps some increased effort in this area as opposed to an emergency. So I'm just wondering, you know, how we can make this, you know, come to the forefront in people's minds, you know, as they go about their daily lives. They, you know, can we get people to be thinking, what can I do to help resolve this climate emergency? So it's, raising the profile, raising the awareness in all senses. Thank you.
Yeah, that is the journey we're on, absolutely, and that's exactly what we're doing. And we've had many discussions on, if you can see that little table, that literally every week there has been a post on climate change in the newspaper for 4 or 5 months on end. And we also use the Subcommittee Facebook pages really well and share a lot. There's been 8-number wire workshop type. There was just one in Waikanae on Saturday, where then our educator comes along and talks about all these issues, tries to connect with the public. But I guess with climate change, to a certain extent, if people are not interested and engaged enough to either read a newspaper or go to a website, we don't really have many more tools than that. Let's put it that way. So we are definitely out there. The threshold is really low to engage with us. We have grants funding programs to enable and support all these kinds of changes that people can make at a grassroots level. But ultimately, we're hopeful that people proactively come to us and use those tools that we offer. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, just got a couple of quick questions. And Councillor Carr, in response to yours, there's a climate strike on the 3rd of March. So hopefully that'll help to get things even more kind of front of mind for the public. And you'd be, of course, welcome to join us at Parliament. So come on down and help out. A couple of questions around the tables, specifically page 16, where we've got action, encourage active transport, the things following on from that and how that could be done. When we put things like completed, when I first looked at this, I was kind of like, I don't actually think we've completed a full encouragement of active transport. There's still a lot more we could be doing in that space. So how do we kind of find a way of communicating this that not only shows what we've done, but also kind of what we're doing, because I'm sure there are a lot more things underway to encourage active transport that maybe this doesn't necessarily reflect. And so when you look at this, it's like it almost looks like we've completed everything we can do to fully encourage active transport, when I think there's potentially more that could be done, and more that council could seek to prioritise to allocate more. Page 16.
We don't have the same page number.
Oh, sorry.
Table 2, I believe.
Table 2, correct, yeah.
First row, table 2.
Yeah, yeah. So just a bit of context around how that's laid out.
This is very practical and a layout question, so I can clarify that quite clearly. I mean, we developed a cycling map and it's ready and available. That's why it says completed. That's the only reason. There is a map, it's available. But we're a complete agreement that a lot needs to be ongoing and happening still.
Yeah.
Yes, the completed is just that particular action.
But more like there's only one in that section that says underway. I'm sure there are a lot more things that are underway.
There is, and that's where this table is a continuation of the tables that were included in the climate change report. So here we're highlighting key pieces of work that occurred in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
So as you know, you're absolutely correct. There's always stuff going on. And what's interesting with transport is when you do pull up the report again, on page 18, every single year they have a range of activities that they're working on. To be fair, as you might know, within the last LTP, because with transport, the way the funding works, 51% funded by Waka Kotahi, I believe they had originally proposed even more work in this space, but Waka Kotahi at the time didn't fund it. So once again, they do have a full work program that they're constantly working on, and that's page 18 and 19 in the report. We could go back to them to get even more detailed information on what that entails. But also, I know that they're actively thinking about what they can do leading up to the next long-term plan as well. I met with the transport team just this week because we were talking about the data that we can use, because as you know, we have a sustainable transport strategy. And we were talking about the data that we can use to actually determine, are all of our attempts to promote alternative forms of transport, whether it be bicycling, mobility scooters, pedestrians, advocating to Greater Wellington for more buses, what type of data can we pull to figure out how effectively it's working? So bike counts can be sometimes quite difficult to get a really good handle on. We have different counters in some of the off-road cycleways where we can regularly see how many people are using some walkways throughout the district. What we sat down and talked about early this week is we have been collecting cycle data at key locations every year for quite a while. And we've thought about how do we pull that all together and then work that into even a bigger plan where we think about, are people cycling more to commute to train stations in the morning? Are they cycling more away from train stations on the weekend, in the evenings? On the weekends, are they just pleasure biking, or can we start to figure out, are they biking to locations like transport? And so we had a discussion about that this week. And that, in some ways, what the team wants to be able to do with that data is figure out, there is so much that we could do across the district to improve the cycle network, for example. But should we start to identify that we have key commuter cycle networks and things like that? So the team is active. They're constantly doing much more than what's listed here. We were just highlighting a few key themes from the last 6 months, but don't you worry, there's much more going on, and we're having discussions about how we can build up more information as we move into the next LTP as well.
Awesome. And just a question too around, what table are we on? Table 4, supporting community adaptation, and the point around offering marae maintenance and development grants, which are often used to undertake sustainability and resilience initiatives. It says it's ongoing, but that there's no further comment. I'm just wondering what the status of that is, or,
If she doesn't mind, I'd love to defer that to Janice. Because of the Christmas holidays, I struggled to get an update, but Janice is here with us. Thanks, Janice.
apologies, I was somewhat distracted and missed the question. I believe it relates to marae grants. Yes.
Which are often used to undertake sustainability and resilience initiatives.
Yes. The specific question was, when are they happening? Was it? Yeah.
What's the status of the...
What? So that's an annual process, and we are at the moment in a cycle where the annual budget is distributed across the marae within the district on an annual basis. So I can't, off the top of my head, recall which of the marae gets their turn this year to have that grant, but can provide some further information if that's useful. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. So Simon Black, Otaki Community Board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for that report. I was looking through that this morning, and there's one area which I'd like to understand a little bit more information about, and that is the cyclic economy. Now, for me, climate change is basically because we're consuming too much, we're relying on too much petroleum, and there's a lot of CO2 emissions, and there's only so much this country and we can do personally. However, one of the things I believe we can do is look at how we minimise the global pollution by how much we consume and what we consume, and that making sure that everything we do and use has a cyclic reusability cycle. So my question is, like looking at EV cars, for example, are we considering the fact that it's been digging up parts of the earth, being supplied to companies like Tesla? We import them, thinking we're doing the right thing, and then we're not actually looking at the disposal cycle. How about everything plastic we buy is coming from China, and apparently China's increase last year, just the increase in their CO2 emissions, dwarfs our total emissions of Australia and New Zealand. So in lowering our consumer cycle and ensuring that we recycle more, we will then probably have an effect on global pollution. So I was just wondering, have we considered these aspects, and how are we bringing these into the fold of our environmental policies?
I would say two things in regards to that. One, yes, absolutely. Your waste minimization team, they spend all of their FTE out in the community doing different things to promote waste minimization and talking about the consumer cycle, going from reduce down to reuse, et cetera, et cetera. We promote, like in next weekend, not this weekend, the weekend after, is a repair cafe in Raumati South. So we support those kind of community initiatives. More importantly, when they, in the last couple of years, when we revised the waste management and minimization bylaw, if you take a note at that, there is a lot of stuff, a lot of our waste in Kapiti actually comes from construction, demolition, home remodeling. So we are actually in the process of building what's the word?
Waste hub.
A waste hub.
On Tuesday.
Yeah, a zero waste hub. So you'll be hearing more about that on Tuesday at a briefing. So that is to help drive reduction to landfill. So we try to, once again, provide a range of education programs to people about how they can reduce their waste and think about that cycle, to children through Enviro schools, to high schools at times for different presentations that they might be asking for. Working with the development community, they will over time, for certain types of developments, they have to have a waste minimization and management plan. We're hoping that by developing the Zero Waste Hub, that will help in those regards. We already have some, in Otaki and also in Otahunga, some of the recycle centers that are located near the transport stations. The transfer stations. Yep. But in addition to that, I would also say the focus that we have, part of that is dictated by funding we receive from central government, but also the decisions that would have been made in the last triennium through the long-term plan. So once again, I want to make a really strong argument if you'd like to see more in that area. When you guys do the visioning work, when you do the visioning work with the strategic team and you start to think about where do we go in our next long-term plan, you can start to think about, are there gaps or things that we want to do differently? And we're open to have those discussions and provide any evidence and support that we can help for you to be able to make those decisions.
Thank you very much. That probably also raises for me channels of communication, how individual households could make a change. Because I think there's a lot of programs which go to the kids and stuff, but I actually haven't seen anything directly. If I look at my local paper, probably an odd ad here and there, but I'd like to see more repetition on what we can do individually. I mean, me personally, I've minimised my waste so much that small bin I don't even put it out once or twice every month. Or, it's once every 2 months I put it out maybe. And so I think there is a long way we can go. When I see across the road they've got a bin fill every month. Just wondering on that subject, things like soft plastics, when are we going to possibly receive other items at the transfer station that we can actually take, essentially, as opposed to just rely on supermarkets to take care of all our other wastes.
This has a high focus on waste minimization, which is just one subject in the carbon footprint, to be truthful. Our carbon footprint on transport is a way bigger worry than waste. But again, yes, the way systems have set up in this country originally are not particularly helpful with the messaging, because first and foremost, as you say, consumerism needs to go down. You need to stop buying the packaging in the first place. So recycling is actually way down the ladder when it comes to doing the right thing for the planet. Not buying it in the first place is the best option. And to add to your question about recycling, unfortunately, we've got 7 types of plastics, and we had to reduce the number of types of plastic we can actually recycle, because simply we used to transport them to other countries to be recycled, and only 1, 2, and 5 plastics can actually be recycled in this country, and that's why those are. And the plastic, soft plastic recycling bins at New Worlds have returned, which is a good thing because they are actually made into fence poles by a unit in Palmerston North. But again, it is small scale. If we were at large scale going to allow everybody to drop them off at the transfer station, there would be no place for them to go, because that outfit in Palmerston North could not keep up. But hopefully, as time develops, we will have more of those opportunities in this country, which would be helpful. So then, hopefully that business case will build, that somebody will set up that facility. And Ministry for the Environment is focusing at this moment in time on organics and C&D waste, so not really on plastic packaging. They're phasing out more packaging, so there will be less of it in our shops. So that's also a good step. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Black, for bringing those matters up. So I sit on the Wellington Regional Waste Forum, and we've had one meeting there, and I suppose there was a lot of conversations about how you recycle. But at the end of the day, it's actually not having to recycle, because you're not using the materials that need to be recycled in the first instance. And I think that's maybe a bit of a mind shift that we all need to to think about moving into more. Thank you. Christian.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting the report together and coming to speak for us today. It's really pleasing to see this, and I know it's a long body of work that's been going on for many years. I also note that you've got a briefing on the Carbon and Energy Management Plan coming on the 28th of February. In there, maybe that will address some of the questions I have. First of all, as a first flush of activity of what's going on for this committee, there's a lot going on. But what I have no sense of from your report is the progress that is being made against any targets. So there's nothing in here about actual emissions, what you started from, what the actual target is in terms of CO2e, and the contribution that each of these activities is making towards reaching that target. So other than seeing that there's a lot going on, which is laudable, I don't know what progress is being made from this report. So for instance, you want to plant 11 hectares of sequestering forestry. I don't know how many tons that is. You then use a metric of how many trees you're planting, and I can't equate that to hectares.
That is exactly what you will be hearing in the briefing on 28th February.
Okay.
You have a carbon and energy management plan, and you will receive a briefing about that and moving into establishing your new one.
Okay. With regard to the target, there's an historic target in there. Are we looking at resetting either the corporate or a district-wide target? And will that be on the basis of being a science-based target?
Yes to both of those questions.
Okay. On the wrong page numbers for you, but you have a point in here about low carbon construction, especially to do with materials that have a high scope 3 embedded emissions. Are you aware of and you probably won't be, it's a bit of a trick question, of the work that Watercare has done in this field, because their biggest source of emissions is the building and maintaining of the water infrastructure. And they had set a target so ambitious that business as usual was never going to get them there. They could never look at incrementalism. It would just never work. They had to stop doing what they were doing if they were going to cut emissions. And they've done an awful lot, including working with a cement producer who then had the confidence to invest in producing low carbon cement because they knew they would have a sufficient volume. Now, clearly, we don't have the volumes of cement purchased as Watercare does, but there are things out there. There are others doing really good work. Sorry?
We are aware. We attend regional and national discussion forums. Our water teams attend national sessions, conferences, basically. And I understand that at both the water supply and the wastewater conferences that occurred within the last 6 months, they absolutely discuss those topics.
Thank you. And again, I would commend the approach of setting targets that cannot be reached by incrementalism, because then you do need to start thinking again, and then you do find better answers.
Yes. Sorry, just to add, we're going to talk about this on the 28th as well, on the corporate emissions, because we're moving towards a discussion on scope 3. Which is limited at this point in time for our council, being quite a lot smaller than Watercare.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly the frame of the discussion as well.
And there's another challenge in there, of course, of getting information on those embedded emissions from your suppliers.
There is a tool available, but it's crude
difficult
at the moment. It's what we have as a tool available to come up with an estimate. But even then, it needs to be framed in capacity and capability at a council at our level as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Three more.
Will be done.
Questions if I know questions if they are, please.
Okay. Is council considering altering its fees and charges so to incentivise people to take actions, such as charges that might be involved with consenting any renewable energy infrastructure for their homes, or to have insulation inspected?
We've had various discussions because residents have emailed us with those questions, and we've had some very recent yesterday discussions with our finance team around that. So we will be providing some information to the elected members. On the fees and charges, I really can't comment. I think that is a discussion that we will have to have with the finance team or the annual plan.
Yeah, that's an annual.
As far as I know, we haven't. I mean, it's not part of this discussion or my team.
It is an annual plan, long-term plan
discussion.
Okay. Will you be, or are you supporting the development of school travel plans?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I believe
Yes, we
every
do.
school but one in the district has a school travel plan, and we have a person in the transport team that works with them regularly. Sean could speak more to that. I see him leaning forward.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that is, yes, we do.
It is supported by our transport team, yes.
And my final question is, when elsewhere in council the issue of speed limits are being considered, do you have a carbon reduction metric that you can apply to that discussion?
I think we probably can, because they do exist, those emission factors that could actually help you calculate how that would help to reduce speed. So yes, we can discuss that with the Access and Transport team.
Yeah, we have not introduced it to date, but we absolutely could.
That discussion has only recently started with a briefing last week, I think so.
Yeah, so there is some work looking at consulting on reducing speed, but I think it's fair to say that there hasn't really been a focus on reducing emissions through that process.
Okay.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions, and a couple of them have been touched on before. So a lot of this work. First of all, thank you very, very much for this paper and the detail in these tables. It's absolutely amazing. The work that's being done. It's quite incredible. So I suppose a lot of this climate emergency work has started around the climate emergency that was announced in 2019, and at that point in time there was a target of reaching carbon neutrality by 2025, and so there's not really a lot about that in here as well. And I just want a very quick comment maybe on how we've having to move on from that or re-looking at that, if possible, please.
I briefed Council about a year ago about the 2025 target and the need to reset that target. So the briefing on the 28th will address this.
Yes, thank you. And so, as I mentioned, there's so much detail in these tables here, and I suppose it's also been touched on here as well, is that it's talking about the action, both as in reductions and in terms of reduction, but I don't know whether it's possible to actually put a percentage next to each of those actions to say this is the outcome of doing these actions. And I suppose it's a measurable, it's probably very tricky, but it's a measurable outcome, and it indicates that it's something that is worthwhile doing.
Do you mean primarily in relation to emissions reduction for the corporation?
Both, yes, both. And it might be too hard basket, but I'm really interested to know, because if you do these things, you want to know that they're actually having a positive effect.
So when it comes to our corporate emissions, the emissions from the services we provide, yes, per business unit, we can clarify how much that business unit is responsible for part of our footprint. When you look at district-wide emissions, Council is just one player.
Yes.
And it's easy to measure your own emissions because you have data available in your systems that can actually quantify those tons of CO2. When it comes to district-wide, it's a lot harder. So the thing we do so far is a regional GHG emissions audit, which has started last month. So we're doing that again, but it's those broad sweeping, this is what it is in transport, this is what it is in waste. To actually do that on an individual level, for example, it's a good example that Brandy talked about. You would ask us to quantify if 10 more people bike to work, how much would that differ? So if you have those data, yes, there are factors in some of that behavior you could translate, I guess, in saving tons, but most of that behavior, you simply don't have the data to make those assumptions. So you hope that long-term behavior trends will reflect in that next 3-year, 6-year, 9-year regional audit, which then tells you that despite the fact that your population has grown, for example, your waste to landfill has gone down, which naturally emissions would grow as population go. And some of these emissions will not go down because as long as your population grows, you are treating more drinking water, you're treating more wastewater. Those emissions simply will not reduce. So to quantify it per sort of small, medium, or large action is extremely hard. And that's why I think at a national level, at a regional level, and a council level, most councils have adopted the 2050 science-based target and then are all on these pathways to reduce as much as possible. But whether or not it actually can be measured very well, that is something we will touch on the 28th as well.
Can I add one thing to that? Through you again, Madam Chair. Ninka's absolutely correct. And I hope that you might get the sense from this report, or even perhaps if you went back and looked at the larger climate report. What's been interesting is we are a small team, and if if you want to talk about a big climate change strategy, you'd be talking about organizational emissions, district-wide emissions potentially, adaptation and protection of council assets and services, supporting the community, educating the community, and holding their hand through transitions. There's a lot of things that we could have in a strategy, and we have done parts depending upon priorities, resources, and decisions that councillors have made. So it's absolutely correct. When we come back, we want to talk with you more about a district-wide emissions reduction target. You don't have one at the moment. Some councils are establishing them, others are not. It doesn't mean that our council has not been trying to deliver services to support that in terms of, transport, waste minimization, et cetera. But what I want to be able to do, and this might get to your question, when we do have a briefing, not so much about the organizational emissions reduction. That's something they will be looking at specific actions and estimated emission reductions. But there are calculators and tools out there where we can say, if we can get 30% of the population to drive 1 day a week less, or if we can get X amount of people to use so many bicycle routes, we can start to guesstimate. And I think that can help us decide where you want to put the biggest focus, because district-wide emissions reduction is really hard. And that is one of the reasons why it is coming. We don't have a full plan there yet. We're definitely doing things, but we want to really tease that out. And then that's something once again that we'll need to work into the long-term plan and resourcing.
It's really made clear that resourcing is our biggest issue. We're a medium council. We don't have 20 people in a climate change team. So it is really, see what we can deliver on a day-to-day basis.
So I note in I suppose, adapting council services and activities, you've got about increasing, I suppose, intensification and increasing our population. I suppose there it's probably more about efficiencies in terms of reducing not our overall carbon footprint, but actually reducing the carbon footprint for each individual person on an efficiency basis.
If I understand you correctly, Madam Chair, what's interesting about that is I think a lot of evidence shows that sometimes the efforts that have been most successful to help people reduce greenhouse gas emissions or reduce waste is when it has become part of a larger system and it just becomes automatic, like we've eliminated plastic bags, for example. So intensification is in some ways important for a lot of reasons. One, that whole idea of like a 15-minute city where you can walk or easily get to the services that you need. You're close to public transport, you'll be more likely to use it if it's easier to get to. At the same time, intensification is important for most of our infrastructure, because it can be really hard when you have a big development that's far from everything. You have a lot of new infrastructure. That being said, particularly with things like stormwater, this is why we have such an intensive long-term stormwater upgrade program, because the stormwater that in some areas, the stormwater infrastructure that we have, it's getting older, or it wasn't built to support intensity like we're now asking. Same with wastewater or any of our infrastructure. So it is complicated, but there are real good reasons for us to want to try and promote it. Land use planning, as we move forward in trying to think about if this council wants to set a target and if you would like to really have more of a focus on district-wide emissions, land use planning is by far one of the most important tools that you will have.
Yeah, thank you. So this is quite different. So this, as I note, that this document is going to go towards the strategy, ops and finance paper. There's it's under the stormwater work there. It talks about one of the completed activities, and this is emergency works at the Narara stream to mitigate risks associated with council-owned wastewater infrastructure, and this has been completed. And I'm not sure whether either of this is on page 21. So I'm not sure whether you're able to answer this question, but I'm just wondering, so the wastewater infrastructure protection of that was used to initiate this emergency these emergency works. But was it not this whole process? Was it not initiated by a group of Peka Peka residents, about 70 of them, because of water inundation? And the reason I'm bringing this up is that it's about correctness of the information that's provided in here.
This update was provided by the team that manages this project. So it's really out of our control to provide more details. Sean,
Yes.
but I'm happy to provide the feedback to the manager.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So that's been a really useful conversation and really useful presentation. And I think what it shows to us as a committee, that there is an awful lot of information, or I suppose topics that we can actually bring to this table. So before we move on to the next section, what I'd like to do...
I have another question, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Coe, I appreciate, sorry, I missed you there, sorry.
Just a quick one, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question in terms of district-wide emissions and so on. A lot of what we're talking about there is behavioural change of people. Has consideration been given to surveying people's behavioural change? In other words, have they started cycling more or walking more? Have they started buying less goods wrapped in plastic, etc., and monitoring that over time? Because it seems to me measuring changes in behaviour may be a lot easier to do than measuring the outcomes of that behaviour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
In the past, we have done things like this, surveyed people and said you have, we do send surveys out to people that have followed our composting workshops to see if they've actually used a voucher to buy a bokashi bin or a worm farm and how they're going. In the past, we have, in larger projects, Low Food, Hate Waste, asked people to keep a diary and actually report back on us, but based on experience, people are only willing to reply to so many surveys. So it's a question you could ask quarterly, but you would always have to pull the same group of people to actually measure progress. If it was a random sample, I wouldn't really know how you could statistically work out if you've made any progress.
Well, I think... Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think you're looking at, if you take a statistical sample, all you're measuring is within a certain sample group, are they exhibiting those behaviours of doing the right things either more often and the not so good things less often. And so I don't think you need to measure the same people all the time from a statistical point of view. And I don't think you need to necessarily be doing it once a quarter, but it could be a similar thing to our customer a resident satisfaction survey. You take a couple of hundred people and you survey them once in a while and look at to try and observe any changes in behaviour. And that's the way of seeing whether the message is getting through and what else needs to be done. And looking at the barriers, we could be asking people, what are the barriers to you not being able to cycle more or walk more, or,
Yeah, so thank you. The last, we've got two more people.
Sorry.
Councillor Hanford. So sorry, Councillor Coe, had you finished?
I'll finish.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Hanford.
I'm just thinking it might be useful to circulate around the table at a later date the results from the survey that we did do, was it last year, around what actions the community thinks that council could be taking, the ways in which they could be enabled to reduce their own footprint, their understanding of the current kind of state of play.
The link to that survey is included in the report, and like you may have heard, or I believe from the Democracy Services email, I didn't realize when the report was uploaded through the Info Council, you may have lost the link. So they sent the link separately, and there is one that will take you to the raw results of that survey that we did, it does not get at every question that you raised, Liz, but it does get at a sense of what would you like to see council do and what are some of the barriers. I understand.
Now. Yeah. And just one other question around that district-wide emissions reduction target or journey that we are on and that we're kind of making some progress towards. What kind of interface do you see that then having with the Climate Emergency Action Framework, this whole kind of the Climate Emergency Action Report and then the updates on that? Would you imagine or would you recommend that we would have a target and then a strategy to work directly towards that, having kind of this reporting on the side? Or would they become part and part the same thing? It makes sense for them to just be the same thing.
Yes, exactly. As you indicate, it will be the same thing, because what this report gives you is how we, through our services, already embed working towards a changing climate, how we're trying to integrate that thinking. So other councils have called this a pathway, and we've called it a climate change update report. So it's really just semantics. This is a pathway we're on to change things when it comes to access and transport, to think about more water, stormwater, wetlands. All these things will go hand in hand ultimately. So I think if we get to a more strategic approach through the LTP, that wording will just morph into a sort of more pathway language, I guess, and that may be more clear.
Yeah, awesome. One other brief question. How do you, from your perspectives, feel that kind of integration is going throughout the organisation in terms of getting the information that you need to compile these sorts of things and making sure that it's really well understood and that people have the resources they need to consider.
Little point needs to be probably updated, and I'm not sure.
You know, I felt that within the development of the last LTP, we prioritized working with those activities that had to write asset management reports and plans required at the time under the LGA. And I think that we developed, as I've said in some of the reports, some of the services have been thinking about these things for a very long time. For others, it's something they haven't thought about as much. They're all learning. And when we have the opportunity through something like an LTP to work directly with our different activity management plans, I think that we have a lot more success, and we're still continuing to work with them. And like I said, transport, for example, is one that I know is quite important because of the high emissions footprint, and we've developed a really good working relationship with that team, despite the fact that they have a huge work plan. So in some ways it is baby steps, but I would say through the last LTP, we also had a good reason to do that because we knew the Auditor General was going to be looking for it. We had guidance from Taituara. I assume that that will continue. And for me, working into the next LTP, working with the strategy team on the vision, the more that we embed it at even that higher strategic level and say we want to see this, the more, you know, Ninka and I and the others, we are a very small team, but we try and make ourselves available to provide support across the organization. And I have found the ones that we are able to work most closely with and develop a relationship with, the better that it is working. And they know now, it's also, I know reporting can be onerous and at times we want to try and reduce the amount of reporting. And this I made as extensive as I could because I knew it was our first time talking to you about this as newly elected members. But they know now that I'm coming as well to ask questions. Carrot and a stick.
So thank you. So I'll leave the last questioning to Simon. We've had a good session on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Far ahead.
Appreciate this. This is just a question actually derived from a previous conversation. I'm just wondering, do we review our targets and actually make sure they're achievable? We were talking about how transport is a significant emissions generator, and because of the nature of the distributed, community that we have, many different hubs, and for a lot of us, reducing our travel is not an option. And when do we actually say enough is enough? We can't actually do any more on this area and actually understand whether we can actually help or not.
that is certainly something that will be part of that discussion when you look at district-wide emissions, because there is definitely a line in the sand as to how much you can promote and support as a council to help people shift to active modes if they still have to travel, take the train instead of driving to Wellington. So we can try incentivize, support, but there is a limit because we don't manage trains, Greater Wellington does. And we don't also manage where people choose to work and if they work from home or not. So it is, yeah, we play a role, a significant role as a regulator, as a supporter, but there are thresholds, so there are just boundaries that we have to work within. And when it comes to target, especially in the transport space, they're mostly set at a national level. So it is the GPS for transport, then it goes into a national plan where all the funding is decided by Whakakotai, then it goes into a regional land transport plan that prioritizes where the funding goes. And then we want to try and submit our program for the next 3 years, and it could be full of footpaths, but if we can't get the funding, it's unaffordable for a council. So we really require that Whakakotai funding for us to make that happen on the ground. So yes, there are all kinds of boundaries, and I think as a council we just need to be transparent if we go to the wider community about this. This is council, this is you, this is industry, this is community, this is business, because they're all players, we're all players, and council is just one of them. Yeah.
Thank you. And the last question is actually probably more for this committee rather than yourselves, because I really appreciate the information you've given us and the effort you put in. I've mentioned a couple of times today that we're only a small council, we've got a small team, but if we are making this a climate emergency and we're actually seriously wanting to consider this as a serious emergency, then perhaps we need more resources in this area to actually help with the efforts. When do we say we actually need a more of a team here to actually help out with all the good effort which is going on here?
So I think that is a question that should be brought to the annual plan process next year. And between now and then, we can have some really good, particularly on how this subcommittee continues or goes, we can really see whether or not there's actually, we can find the evidence for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. So now on page 7, we have 3 recommendations, and I'll take them all as one, unless anyone would rather do them individually. The first one is note that the Kapiti Coast District Council Climate Emergency Action Framework. 2, note the progress of the Kapiti Coast District Council Climate Emergency Action Plan from 1 July 22 to 31st July 2002. Submit this, and this is 3, submit this report as a noting paper to the Council meeting on the 23rd of February 2020 to enable a wider understanding amongst elected members of Council's Climate Emergency Action Framework and Plan, and ensure that climate change continues to be embedded across the organisation. All those in favour say aye. Those against? Passed. Oh, sorry. Sorry, yes, we have a second. Yes, sorry, yes. So Sophie moves it and the seconder. Okay, Simon, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. And I would really like to thank Brandy and Ninka for preparing very, very detailed report and providing very detailed and inspiring answers to the questions and comments that are made by members of this subcommittee. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the matter of an urgent nature, and after that we will have a short break. I know that time is chomping on. So this matter was brought to my attention yesterday. I think you were all CC'd into the email when it was circulated by Mr. Moore. So I will now hand over to Mr. Moore to explain why he's brought this to this subcommittee, and maybe have a discussion about where we go with it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pravano. I couldn't think of a more important example and subject to bring to this committee in its inaugural meeting in this triennium. I'm from Te Horo, like somebody else is around this table here, and Councillor Coe is as well. For a long history, I think Te Horo Beach has been neglected and ignored in coastal management. I'm going to put a couple of pictures up here, just a graphic of the map shortly, just to get people who are not familiar with Te Horo of exactly the area we're trying to talk about in protection. I think my starting point in this whole conversation, regardless of the, not regardless, but putting aside the bylaw discussion and review that occurred in 2019 and 2020, is that this area not only deserves environmental protection by this council and leadership, but other reports and agencies had showed that this is a critically endangered area. So it's not just a nice to do. And we have other successes in this community, in this coastal area of great accolade to look at. And one notable comparison is the Waikanae Estuary, which has now got scientific reserve status. And we should all be extraordinarily proud of that. And there was a time when people demanded to drive in there with their fishing nets and their white baiting. They could still access some of those recreational pursuits, but they stopped allowing vehicles to drive in there. And that's all we're asking for about 135 metres to stop driving in. So you can see on the screen there where the two red markers are. The first red marker on the top right is where the temporary blocks were put in about the 23rd of December, I think. And that occurred operationally, but it really was a reaction operationally after a paper was brought to the Community Board in November, the Waikanae Community Board, showing the highlighted problem that the bylaw preventing access onto the beach, north, across and through the stream, and south, both of which are not allowed, had continued to happen even after that review had occurred and the bylaw was passed. So that area there is part of a large wetland and estuarine area. We call it a lagoon because it had historical areas of being a lagoon. We can't see the full area, but the wetland area exists from that road area on the corner right the way south to the Sea Road beach toilets, and it's not all covered in that Google Map image there. Ironically, when that Google Map image was snapped some 2 or 3 years ago, you can actually see a car right on the beach there, just to the south of that other red line. That's the area we're trying to say we don't want vehicles to access. And this is the thing at the heart of all this. These two pieces of plastic are probably why I'm here today. In the last few days, somebody who was attached to this whole protest and this violence and vandalism of destroying the signs, not only the volunteer signs of the Friends of Mangoni Lagoon, but the council sign of protecting and stop swimming in that lagoon and that stream area because it's got lots of problems at the moment. We don't want children to swim in it and what have you. Went ahead and drilled 2 big holes out of a water tank of 2 of the proponents of protecting and advocating for this area to be protected. And it's going to cost several $1,000s. Now, of course, we don't have evidence that they did this, but they were targeted online, and this is the kind of violence that they've been unleashing. It's not the first time that this group of people who don't want this, and we believe it's very small but loud and vocal people, all they're arguing for is wanting to drive there. And we're just trying to say this is an area that deserves this council's protection. I'll throw it back to probably the chair to how we can direct this discussion and what we would like this committee to do. But I would like that the community engagement that needs to go forth from here sets a minimum standard that this area is an environmental area of acute protection required, and it can't be mixed with vehicles driving in there. And we're not asking for much when there is a lot of this coastline that people can drive on legally and permitted so. And in most part, they look after this area very well, drivers, but there are a small number who want to abuse this area. And, you know, this area has got nesting birds on it right now, and it's got a very fragile ecosystem. And if there's one thing that I want to achieve why I serve on this council, is to see an area like this looked after, protected and rehabilitated.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I see that Councillor Coe would like to speak, but before I do that, I'd like to just briefly explain why I have allowed this matter of an urgent nature to be brought before the subcommittee. So, as has been mentioned, this was brought to the Waikanae Community Board in early November, and since then there has been, I suppose, increased activity, angst around use or non-use of the section of Te Horo Beach, and we must be mindful of the fact that I think it was in 2007 that this the bylaw that restricted or stopped vehicles going on the beach came into being. So in December, the blocks were put in. And they have been just very recently removed. And over the last week, there has been high escalation in some of the activities that have been going on here. So at the end of the day, I think it's really important for this committee, with its emphasis, to be aware of this. We also need to be mindful that the outcome. So this is based on a bylaw, but at the end of the day, what actually occurs on that beach is an operational matter that is decided upon by staff. So I will allow some conversations to people to make some views, and then we will hopefully form a way forward in terms of. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes. So, Councillor Coe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I would just like to add to the conversation, because I have been engaging extensively online with some of the proponents of, the people who wish to continue driving on the beach. This is an urgent matter because we have seen a number of instances of deliberate flouting of the bylaws, and I myself observed 2 utes just last weekend driving around that area through the stream and on up towards Sims Road or wherever they exited from that area. So the bylaws are constantly being breached, and in what I believe is a sort of an up yours kind of way. You know, we're gonna do this regardless. So my impression of these people is that their starting point is, we have driven on the beach for decades, and until such time as you can prove environmental damage, we would like to continue to do so. I guess that doesn't stack up for me, because once environmental damage is done, it's very hard to reverse that damage. So, for example, if we somehow eliminated the banded dotterel population from the stream, you know, you're not going to get them back. So I guess, you know, my starting point, which I've tried to stress to them, is the bylaw exists. We should be observing that unless there is good reason not to. And I have pressed these people for a good reason why they should be disregarding the bylaw. The only reason that has really been put forward is because we've been driving on the beach for decades, and we want to be able to drive down and see the sunset. Somebody told me yesterday, apparently it's some kind of a Tinder meeting point. It's a romantic area where you go and cuddle up with your date for the night or something. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but to me that is not a valid reason to be driving in that area. So unfortunately, there was a survey done. Was it a year ago or last year? Sometime.
I think it was part of the consultation process.
Yes, and I think there is a perception amongst the community that the results of that survey were binding in some way. in terms of, I don't believe the survey was worded particularly clearly, but yeah, there was apparently a 62% majority of people did not want barriers there, but aside from that, I don't believe that survey is binding on council in terms of then saying, well, we're not going to have barriers then. So there is some expectation setting to be done urgently in this area. It's becoming a very divisive issue and resulting in quite violent, aggressive behaviour, which is particularly unpleasant and leaves people such as myself, who is an elected member, feeling particularly vulnerable. So I believe there is a meeting to be held on Saturday the 18th at that location by the ringleader of the people who are opposed to the barriers, looking at alternative options. Now, I'm not sure what undertaking has been given to the ringleader in terms of the extent to which we will take on board any recommendations on alternative options. But I think there is an expectation, again, that after that meeting they'll be able to present back to council and there will be some process by which we will accept or reject their alternative recommendations. So I think, again, that's another reason why this is an urgent topic for discussion, because we need to set the correct expectations amongst members of the community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Coe. If I can ask Mr Jefferson or any other staff members whether or not there has been any communication, direct communication between the person who is setting up the barbecue conversation and council staff.
I haven't, Madam Chair. I'm looking at Mr Mandonta.
Not directly.
And the Chief Executive, no.
Right, thank you. Thank you. So, Mr Black.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd like to first state that I completely support Mike. We need to protect our environment. You know, it's at risk, and we need to put higher safeguards in place. Probably the general issue which comes into play here is, if it's breaking bylaws, how are we enforcing bylaws? Not just here, but everywhere, right? How are we enforcing our bylaws? And also, I don't think a punitive approach is going to work, because that's exactly what we're going to get, is vigilantes. So the other thing is, how are we going to engage the community to change behaviours? And I think that has to be in tandem, and people don't like sudden change. They need to be gradually brought into that. So I suggest we need to actually discuss this as a wider issue, not just as one issue, because this is something I think we need to actually address in general. And also, when do we report matters to the police? You know, harassment, abuse, vigilantes. When does this become a police matter as well? And so I think the wider discussion of how we're going to protect our environment also needs to be in play.
Thank you. So it's my understanding that some of these matters have been brought to the attention of the police. Maybe I can ask Mr Jefferson to make some comments about your...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will start the ball rolling and then turn to Mr Mondonsa for some extra history and background. So look, I'll take the question around how do we enforce bylaws. Generally not an issue. With this one, and particularly the aspect of driving, we are hamstrung. We have no power to stop moving vehicles. We have no power, unlike Glenn and I in a previous life, where we could require the owner of the vehicle to provide us the details of who is driving. We don't have that access to that tool in our tool. So we are really neutered in terms of the driving issue. And we look to police, and to be fair to our police colleagues, they have huge operational constraints, but I know that our compliance team have worked closely with them in the past and been able to get some traction, particularly up in Otaki, which of course is a different policing district. So we need to do some relationship building again with the police here. But look, in terms of the rest of the background, Mike, do you want to talk to them?
Thanks, James. Thanks, Madam Chair. Committee members, I just think it's worth thinking about the context, the broader context here for a bit. This is an issue around the country at the moment. I'm not making excuses here at all, but it's worth, sorry, Janice, it's worth just understanding that you would have seen reports of this happening in Auckland. It's definitely a big issue up in Horowhenua, and you may have read about Titahi Bay having exactly the same or similar issues when they closed the beach there successfully, actually, a couple of years ago. And in some ways, this is a bit of a bellwether for us, because this bylaw doesn't just apply to Te Horo, it applies to many parts of our coast. And if we don't get this right, then we're going to really struggle when it comes to Paraparaumu and Waikanae and other parts of the beach that we need to control better than we are at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's just being mindful that there's a wider issue here.
Operational matter.
As we grow, as our population grows, this is going to become more and more of an issue as we have more and more vehicles, more boats, and more pressure on our beaches. So this is kind of the beginning of, I think, what's going to be quite a difficult passage for us. Along with James's team, we're really turning our minds now to the Paraparaumu beach and how we're going to implement the bylaw there. You can imagine, as one of the councillors just pointed out, there's this kind of God-given right for people to drive on certain parts of the beach. Excuse me, that was rude, but there is a customary right, as people perceive it, to drive on the beach, and what we're seen as doing is taking that right away. So yes, we're trying to lead change here, manage change. It's always difficult, particularly in areas where people can kind of sometimes be a bit bloody-minded on some of these issues. So I just wanted to say that we're eyes wide open with respect to what we can actually do. We're not the police. I don't think doing nothing's an option either, but we're very keen to bring this back to the Waikanae Community Board for a discussion around this, a controlled discussion, so that we can start to bring the parties together and start having the beginnings of some kind of resolution. But at the end of the day, what we don't want to do is to relitigate and revisit the bylaw. So one of the issues with the meeting on the 18th is pretty much to talk about whether or not we should have a bylaw. But I don't believe that's up for grabs and we should be having that discussion. What we should be discussing is how we're going to achieve the outcome, which is no vehicles on the beach. I think that's our starting point, which will be difficult. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If I can just make a comment too. So I think at the end of the day, there's nothing actually wrong with the bylaw. It's how it's enacted, and how I suppose how it's enacted, enforced, and how we actually get those people who don't necessarily agree with it to come on board with it. And there's some, even though that's very simple to say, it's not necessarily that easy to solve. So I am just, so is it Mike, or was it Janice who is next up, or is it, or
Janice is Mike.
Okay, so Simon again.
Sorry, it just was a continuation from that discussion. So thank you very much for those answers there, and I get the fact that we can't enforce these bylaws, but what raises questions of how we can assist the enforcers to enforce. If there's monitoring that we can actually do and actually pass evidence back to the police for prosecution, or having words with people. I think there's probably other methods we can, we could kind of in a hard place, between a rock and hard place, because we're supposed to apply bylaws, but we can't enforce them. So we need to look at methods on how we actually can get around that.
Yeah, so if I can ask Mr. Jefferson to make some comments about how we can actually monitor it, or how we can actually assist enforcement.
I think through you, Madam Chair, part of the discussion will be at the Waikanae Community Board, and we'll have staff there to support those discussions in terms of what's palatable for the community, but what we can actually deliver and not deliver, and what we might need in addition to our current resource to manage that. I think it would be good for police to be invited to that meeting. I think they need to be front and centre of this with us. So yeah, I see those solutions generation. My respectful submission is that the Waikanae Community Board is the right place to start that ground up solutions, because that's where hopefully we can engage some of the protagonists.
So thank you, Mr. Jefferson. And I also think, as this was brought as a matter of an urgent nature, that this committee is also kept up to date as to how this progresses. And I think it's not a 5-minute fix. We will get there. But I think the quicker we start looking at this matter, the quicker it will be solved. So, Christian.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Mike for bringing this to all of our attention. I was going to raise the issues that have already been canvassed around enforcement of the police, and I have one remaining question. It might be through you, Chair, to the Chief Executive. Are we able to guarantee the safety of any council staff that are involved in this area?
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair. I can most certainly guarantee the safety of my staff undertaking operational activities. That's something that's at the front of our mind. I'm not in a position to put anyone at risk. Life is more important than confrontation in matters that don't pertain to our core business. We have a police force, and that's what they're there for.
Thank you for that reassurance.
Councillor Warwick.
I'm going to take a slightly different lens, and I'm not saying we shouldn't block it off, but the thing is, communities get used to their patch and what they like to do. I come from a family who does use the beach a lot. My parents go down, and where they're allowed to. It's not, north of the boat ramp, just clarifying. But if someone put a barrier up there, there would be a whole lot of people in Otaki who were very upset, because there's a whole lot of people who do use these places very respectfully. So there's idiots everywhere. There's idiots. There'll be a line of people in Otaki enjoying the beach, having their dinner, fishing and stuff, and then you get the idiots going past on motorbikes or cars. The council can't do anything about that, and the community doesn't like it either. But it seems like here this has been done really swiftly to the community. That just gets everyone's back up, and we need to work with the community, all of them, and take it a little bit slower, because this has been going on now forever. It's not that it's right, but an overnight fix is not going to do the community. That's what's happened. We've just divided the community. Is there any scope? There's people who probably go there for the spot that it is, to enjoy the evening or sit in their car. Is there any scope at the end of there to put in another little area that people could park in? Where they can see on the south?
Through the chair.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know, just are there any options there for that little area that people could go and enjoy the view but not access the beach or the river? I just think the community is upset because it's been done to them really rapidly without, it wasn't going to happen, and now bang, it did.
Yeah, so I thank you for your comments, and I think, as I said earlier on, this will take a little time to resolve, and I think all the matters that you've brought forward are very valid, and they'll all be taken into consideration and be probably part of the solution. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Say thank you.
No, I'm not going to say thank you. I was just thinking in my tiny mind, opposite to Shelley actually, the reality is, over a long period of time, the police don't have the capacity at all, and haven't done for the 20 years I've been up on the Kapiti Coast. The bylaw's in place. Why don't we there's an access to the beach 300 metres south of that access point, I believe. Why don't we just block it off? And stand by it. Stand by the bylaw. We passed it. And block it off. Try and move 50-tonne of concrete blocks. Spray paint it. Push them south into the area we want them. Just a question. Would be my fix.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Anyway. Is there, that might be a question for the council, because the blocks we put on now, they're removed. So
I think even with blocks that were there, one was moved by a vehicle. But I think all the comments from all councillors and members around this table are all valid and should be added into the mix before we make a solution. We come up with a solution. Thank you. So, Kim, would you like to?
Yes, sorry. Just to add that I'm pretty sure that that area is in the Ngahapu tribal boundary. So I'll take that back because it's about, yes, it is about access to the beaches, and yes, we are all used to. I remember driving on that beach when I was a baby. But the other thing is, for me, it's about the river's right there. The Mangoni is right there, and we've done a lot of work in Ngahapu to try and protect the Mangoni, and there's been a lot of work done along the Mangoni stream. And we've just, I think it was last year, we put a proposal for a mahinga kai, so it's basically monitoring those waterways to see the effects that the environment's having, or outside environmental impacts on them, on mahinga kai, on collecting traditional foods and all that stuff. So that's the sticking point, that the river is right there. It's not like you're just driving up on the sand and going along the beach. So that is the difference in that access point. I get though, because you know, when those things happen, all of us that grew up in the time where you could do anything on the beach, light a fire, run a dog, sleep over, all go, oh, you know, but the bylaw's been passed and times change. So I'm not saying either way, but I would like to take it back to Ngahapu and just see what that looks like. And from our perspective, it should always be inclusive. Like I'll let them know about the meeting, because it's now in the Waikanae community area, because the boundary's here. But yeah, any decision that should be made should be done in conjunction with mana whenua, because that's within our tribal boundary.
Appreciate that. So if I can just ask Councillor Coe and Mr Moore, when they access that point onto the beach, do they cross the stream, or do they go south, or they go both ways?
It's on. Perhaps I'll speak first. So they don't have to cross the stream in order to get to the. Like, there is a point there where you can observe the sunset, and that's the one they want to protect. And you don't have to cross the stream in order to get there. But what happens is people use that road as an access point to then head north across the stream. So yeah, that's really the issue. And I just want to, while I've got the microphone, also add in that we do have an issue in that when council were discussing the bylaws and they looked at the results of the survey that was done, there was a decision made by council not to introduce barriers. And these people who are opponents of the barriers keep referring back to that. Somehow in our processes we need to be able to reverse that decision, because that's a decision that stands at the moment. So yeah, how do we do that? How do we reverse that decision? Yeah, so that where that red, the left-hand red line is about where you park up to look at the sunset over Kapiti Island.
Okay. Before we move on to Mr Moore, Mr Jefferson would make some comments, please.
Look, thank you. Through the chair, my advice to this committee and to council would be that unless that decision of council not to put a barrier was in the recommendations and what was resolved, I believe it has less weight, notwithstanding there's a process to go through, because I think there were some promises made by elected members at the time, and some staff were put on the spot on the day the bylaw was passed about consultation. But actually, my advice to this committee would be, unless it's part of the resolution of what was resolved in the bylaw, then it is actually up for grabs, notwithstanding a process to go through.
Okay, well that needs to be communicated somehow to the opponents of the barriers.
So just for clarification then, and obviously I can't remember the detail of the recommendations that were made. So if you're saying that there's no specific mention of not putting up barriers in the recommendation,
And what was resolved.
yes, then there is more leeway in in the way the decision is actually formed going forward. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Moore.
Right, look, I'll just add a few points, and that's really good to hear that, Mr. Jefferson, that kind of clarification. I mean, you don't do a survey to ask if people should abide by a bylaw or not. You just don't, you know. We don't ask people, do you want to speed down this section of road or not? Because it might be a nice straight road which not many people use. This is a known and a registered ecologically endangered area. And I start from that when I talk today, and I want to end with that. You know, when we listen to the vitriol and the anger online from a very small number, which I hasten to compare to the parliamentary protests of a very small number of vocal and get attention. But what was happening in Te Horo Beach over the last 5 or 6 weeks online, as Councillor Coe will assist with this, is that they were using a lot of misinformation. And there's a void there because they don't have access to that. And this did happen, and I agree with what Councillor Warwick was saying. It happened kind of quite suddenly, but it was done at a time when we see an increased amount of vehicles in that area over the holiday season, and it was done as a preventive. We should also look at it was a success in some ways. There was no or very little activity around that way in vehicles. The area has been starting to slowly recover, and nature will deal with it if it's left untouched by vehicles. We're not saying people can't go there and watch the sunset. We're not saying people can't go there and fish or walk with their dog on a leash. We're not saying they can't go there on a Tinder date. They can enjoy that space as they should, and we encourage that. The Friends of Mangoni Lagoon that formed at the bylaw review process nearly 3 years ago want to put a very detailed plan together for recovery and rehabilitation and work with agencies and foundations like the Nikau Foundation to get some big seed funding to do things which might include boardwalks, interpretations and what have you, similar to what Waikanai Estuary's got. It has great, exciting potential. I'm the first to admit it needs education to the community to take them with us, because that hasn't occurred to a small number. The violence and the way they unleashed smashing things up and graffitiing and shooting the signs, which happened some 4 or 5 years ago to a separate incident, is really concerning, you know. And we can't tolerate that, and we shouldn't succumb to allow that. Stopping access there just for vehicles is not the end of the world, and eventually, like they did in Waikanai Estuary, got used to it and understood the great benefits to the wider coastal ecosystem. And it can and will become in recovery. And I did flick one of these before, but we had an early, I'll just zip through them. That's the sign that the Friends group put together with photos from the other regional groups. This photo here is the lagoon system from some 20 or 30 years ago. It's a magnificent wetland area, and the key native ecosystem refers to this entire stretch as being critically endangered. And there is extensive wetlands which people, especially in four-wheel drive trucks, don't see. And it extends right down to the beach road car parks at Sea Road. So it is an area that, of course, I'm passionate on, not only because I'm a resident down there, as Councillor Coe is, but it is something worth fighting for. And, of course, we've done things like we've done forever, and we should be allowed to do it. Farmers did things 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago that they don't do now. We've improved the way we manage our environment so it can sustain and give us the food. It's a beautiful tahonga that we should create and be proud of, that we can create for this little community of Te Horo. And I'd commend everybody to actually support that we can progress this in a way that has a really good environmental outcome. I'll sign off by saying that we should take leadership on this, and listening to some of the strange stuff that was said online is that when we drive through that stream, quote, the whitebait get out the road. The birds always stay on the other side when they're nesting, and we have this side. So these are the kind of language and the misinformations that they think and how an ecosystem works. It reminds me of, you know, those signs which you see in northern Canada where somebody sees a sign, deer crossing here. and somebody says, well, we really should move those signs down there because it's too dangerous for them to cross here. So, you know, I think here's an area we have available to us to do something really good about and have a great legacy in this train, and I commend that to this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. So I'm conscious that Kim has a question, but I have one question for staff. How far is it between where the barriers were and the sea, the beach? How far, if there was something in there, how far would people need to walk as opposed to, how far do they have to? Mr. Mendonça? It's not very far, is it? Okay, thank you.
It wouldn't be 100 metres.
Yeah, thank you. Kim, back to you again. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm good. Just an observation, and quickly. The whole point of it is to protect the area. So sometimes, and vandalism is vandalism, breaking bylaws is breaking bylaws, idiots are idiots, so you're not going to change that. But when we're talking about trying to put barriers in so that we can protect the environment, sometimes when you focus on protecting the environment and not focus on taking something away, it helps the situation. So if you're going, we're going to put this in place to protect the river, we're going to put this in place to protect the wetlands, and don't even go there on the, you can't go in here because the wetlands there and the river's there, it changes the conversation. Looking at things from that approach, I mean, people break bylaws all the time, people break laws all the time, and that's for the police to handle. I don't think that's for the council to handle. And banging your head against someone who's banging their head against you is not going to help. So just maybe trying to find another way to get to that point that we're trying to get to, which is to protect the environment, and maybe changing the conversation a bit. I don't know.
Thank you, Kim. Janet.
I'll be really brief. I agree with that, Kim. I think those are really wise words, and they certainly affirm what I've experienced over the years as an elected member. People don't like change, and they get very resistant to it, and very it can quickly boil over into an emotional response, you know. And I just really want to acknowledge the intention when those blocks were put there, not just by Mike and Liz and the community board, but by the staff, you know, the staff as well, the work that Andy Mackay's done on this. Mike, it's and I can completely understand it, and I probably would have done exactly the same thing. But once I had the information and I went back through and realised how we made those decisions in terms of the operational response to the beach bylaw, you know, when you make a decision a certain way, to unwind it, you kind of have to unwind it with the same people that you made it with, or else you're seen as kind of bulldozing. So to me, the removal of those blocks is just, it's a temporary measure while we let things settle down so that we can, as Jocelyn has said so well, move on, taking our time, you know, in a positive way, and with Ngā Hapa Ōtaki too. So, yeah, we're not in an easy spot with this right now. There's a lot of division in that community, and I think it's terrible. And I acknowledge how hard that's been for our elected members as well. But I'm there to support as much as I can. And this committee, thank you for your oversight over this, Madam Chair. And also the community board are right behind. So, yeah, a work in progress. If we're going to have a meeting, there will be angry people, but you just get through it. You get out the other side. You have another meeting and it's better. Then you have another meeting and it's better still. That's my experience. So, yeah, but I'm there to support.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to say I'll leave the last words to Shelley, but maybe I'll leave them after Shelley, there will be Liz, and unless anyone who hasn't spoken before would like to speak, I think, yes, okay, off you go, Shelley.
I just wanted to know if there's any scope to consider reconfiguring at the end of that road, because people are still going to access the end of that road. It's very narrow. They're going to come across a barrier eventually, and then how are they going to turn around? So is there any scope with the land that around the first red line that could be made into a little turning bay or something like that, which would give vehicles going in there an ability to get out? You could then protect the wetland and the river and stuff, and the community feels like they're not completely shut out of their little spot. I don't know. I don't know if the council owns that bit of the beachfront there.
Yeah, thank you. I think there is a parking area there, but that's something we can look at as well. So, Councillor Coe?
Yeah, just to follow on from that, you can get 2 vehicles parked up in that area, and I've never really seen more than 2 vehicles there. It's not used heavily, to that extent. But the other thing I'd like to say is I acknowledge what Kim said earlier. However, these people have no consideration at all for the environment. So that's not going to work with them. Their view is that they will continue doing what they're doing until the environment is damaged. And then when the environment is damaged, then they might think about it. So I think appealing to them on that basis is just not going to progress this, provide a solution to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford.
Sorry, I'll be really quick. I just wanted to tautoko.
Yeah, Martin. Yeah.
Oh, Martin's as well.
Yeah, no, you go first.
Okay.
You go first, and then
Awesome.
Martin.
Just wanted to really tautoko and support the work of Michael and the rest of the community board. Specifically how clearly and articulately you've spoken about the need for this, not only for environmental reasons, but also for people's safety and for leadership, I guess, too, and operationalising what is aiming to, as much as we can, keep people off our taonga that are our beaches, and they're part of what makes Kapiti so incredibly special. And if we don't have them for the next generation, if the environment's slowly being degraded over a period of time, that's not a legacy that I don't think any of us want to leave. So just thanks for your leadership in this space. And I do think, in the face of kind of potentially adversarial reactions, that's only more of a reason for us to just kind of stand up and lead however we can. And this seems like a really practical way that we can do such a thing, both for our environment but also for the residents down at Te Horo Beach who are kind of on the front lines of this. So just solidarity and support, and any way that we can help out, I'm fully on board with us doing.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. So, Councillor Halliday, unless there's any other people who haven't spoken, he'll be the last person.
Thank you for speaking rights, Madam Chair. Look, I don't know if you're aware, but I used to live on that corner there as well, under Liz's place until recently, in an apartment. Been there for 3 years, so I'm very, very, very familiar with the area. I'm not just going to say there's a right or a wrong. I just want to make some observations, if that's all right. That map is a little bit misleading, and our beach bylaw only refers to one beach access, which is via Rodney Street. That is not a beach access. That is a car park. Okay. When you talk about the turnaround area, as Shelley did, it's where that second red line is. You see some trees there. It's on the right-hand side of those. That's it. That's as far as anyone's meant to go in there. No further than that.
So just to clarify, the one on nearest the.
To the right
of the second red line.
Okay, so that's trees. People come in here. That's trees. This here changes incredibly regularly. You can literally come down the next day and that there is cut down, and I'm not kidding, a 5-foot bank down here. Then you come back 2 weeks later, completely changed again. So it's a very, very live area as such. People do whitebait there, and I think that's just where this problem potentially lies. There's a reserve here. People can park here. People can park here. If you're going to put any barriers down here at all, they would have to be here, because what Shelley said is correct. If you're trying to turn around here, you can't. It's as simple as that. You just can't. this was some. We've got a lovely area here, and it's big with regards to car park. We could maybe put a little bit of time into tidying that up or something along that sort of line. And you could even quite easily put some viewing platforms there, because yes, people do go down there to see the sunset, but you can see it just as easily over here as well. No troubles at all. And the Rodney Street access, you're supposed to hang a left and go down the Peka Peka beach. You're not supposed to hang a right. But a lot of people do, and they just come straight down there and they just go straight across. They don't tend to hang out around here, they just go across, or you get the, and look, one thing your blocks aren't going to sort out are the motorbike riders. They are a big problem up there as well. They come belting through there all the time. Personally, I think it's how my cat got killed about here. You know, cars go about every 15 minutes. I've got a feeling it was more than likely by a motorcycle rider, sort of scenario. And they believe it's their right to have that access, and therein lies your problem. Just my observations, but if you are going to block this off, you're going to have to do it up here. Yeah, and just wanted to add those observations. I think Kim's view with regards to approaching this in a different manner is a very good one. If we go down that pathway, because at the end of the day, what you are protecting is the estuary. It's not about driving on the beach. And if people aren't looking after that estuary by being in that small car park, you might as well block access to it, because they can access to you can park it in that other area there, or you could even potentially create a little bit of a park there as well. And by the way, when you get a tide surge or anything like that happen up there, there is a huge amount of debris all down that path, and I think council more than likely has to go in quite regularly and clear the debris out of that. So there's actually quite a lot of expense involved in maintaining that very small car park as well. And quite frankly, it doesn't really get a heck of a lot of use.
So thank you, Councillor Halliday. I have a question for staff. What actually is the designation, or what is the, is that a formal road? What is the, what is that little piece of driveway? I know it's used at times or can be used for emergency access, but what is the designation of that piece of?
It is a road just by definition under the Land Transport Act. Anywhere that a vehicle can drive and does is a road.
How far down though?
The beach, the whole beach becomes a road.
No, in the normal course of events, where as a normal road, how much of that strip is road?
It's all of the beach is road.
So, for example, if that, I think it's got metal there, if that metal was dug up and planted into grass, does that mean that it's still a road? What does that mean? So I'm talking about this area, this section just in here.
Is all road, legal road.
So it's a legal road, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
So I want to have a crack at some recommendations to resolve.
Yeah, so we, Mr. Jefferson and I had some draft recommendations here, but before we move into that, I just quickly want to make the comment that it's a tricky situation here, and it's something that we need to work through carefully, and I think, and hopefully we can work through that as quickly as possible, but I know it's not going to happen tomorrow. So with that, we'll put the, Mr. Jefferson will read out the recommendations.
Read my own hieroglyphics,
and
otherwise I would have given them to Anna already.
And then we can have some conversations
and
around them.
happy for you to help me with the wording on this, maybe wording by committee. First and foremost, we need a recommendation to receive the matter of an urgent nature. So I think, even though the chair's got that discretion to do that, I think it's good form to do. No, second, I'm just waiting. B, Anna, would be something along the line, this committee note that the bylaw forbids driving on the beach. That I think is
on that section of the beach
is the important base. As per the bylaw, I just acknowledge that the bylaw forbids driving on that part of the beach. No, the bylaw will do that. You're just all you're doing is noting that it's a forbidden activity.
Not in some areas,
Yep.
it's not.
For the purposes of this
Okay,
matter under.
okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. You may want to discuss this, but I think note that this is an operational matter, but has high community and political interest.
Yep.
Let me try and get them all out and then get feedback on them all. Note that this issue is complex and is a national issue. I think it's important. Note that the Waikanae Community Board will discuss this on the 28th, is it, Mike, of February? Yep. Sure, we can. As part of that meeting, staff will consider a range of options, potential solutions to bring to the board. If any direction from the Waikanae Community Board should be canvassed, I'm looking for the right word, but certainly canvassed. I want to acknowledge Kim's kōrero around iwi having input into that process. So should be with Ngā Hapu. Yeah. Please feel free to polish this shortly. And that this committee lastly notes that staff will provide regular updates to this committee and the Waikanae Community Board, something along that line.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. So what I'll do now is I will I'll ask for any feedback. I will let one person have one opportunity to speak. Councillor Warwick.
Can you go back up to the top? So with regard to what Kim said and refocusing the issue away from the driving on the beach and back to the ecology of the stream, can you go up to the first bit? No, the first.
That was just, I didn't capture what individual people.
No, there was a bit above that.
That was just.
That might have been just
there.
preamble.
That's a draft minutes process, so that has just been taken and it hasn't been refined in any way by listening to the recording yet. So that's simply notes that have been taken, so they are not confirmed and they're not. So that doesn't form part of the recommendation or the resolution. The minute just needs to capture the recommendation.
So it's focusing on the driving on the beach instead of the protection of the Mangoni stream and the ecology of the area. And it seems that the community is most upset that they've been told they can't drive on the beach. And if you, like what Kim said, if you refocus it a little bit to the actual issue, because driving on the beach is an issue and driving through the stream, but if they can't get into that access, they're more likely to drive closer to the sea on the wet sand, which still isn't ideal, but it's not as bad for the environment. But you're focusing on the driving rather than the issue of the area, the ecology, the wetland, and that protection. And that's what's got everyone's back up, I think.
We can unpack that as part of the community conversation.
I hear what you're saying, but I suppose the other part of this, which hasn't actually been brought up today, that if you actually go to the south end of Rodney Road, is it Rodney Road? You can actually, Rodney Avenue, you can actually drive up there anyway. You can drive up that way anyway.
But people aren't, that's not the perception. They're just thinking they're losing the access.
Yeah.
Just refocusing it might actually just, I don't know, it just doesn't take away, then you're adding to their lifestyle. You're giving them something extra rather than taking it away.
Okay.
Should you add something in there about the ecological importance of that area? That's what I'm taking.
Did you get that, Anna?
So are we adding to B? Like,
Or add maybe between A and B, or have a new B. Something that the subcommittee recognises the ecological importance of the area. Yeah.
And the need to protect it.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you, Shirley. Mr. Black.
Oh, just a small addition there is part of the Waikanai Community Board meeting. Do we need to mention that we should consider inviting police to attend to discuss enforcement options?
I'm brain dead, so you come up with the words, but that's all right. Yeah,
Perfect.
Happy with that.
Done.
Yeah.
Anna, at F, at the end of F, note that staff will invite police to attend that meeting.
Thank you, Simon. Are you complete? Councillor Cooper.
I'll be quick. Just in relation to, I'm going blind.
Put your glasses on.
The operational, note this matter is an operational matter. If we, and it's maybe semantics, I don't know, James will probably have help out. If we're choosing not to enforce the bylaw, or by removing one of the blocks, allowing that bylaw to be breached, does that move it into a governance issue as well?
I think that's why I've included and has strong political interest.
Okay.
Thanks. Yep. Yep.
Did anyone else wish to comment on the words we have up there?
Please say no.
I have a thought in relation to B. So it's my memory that some of the reasoning for limiting access to the beach was not only about protecting the environment, but also protecting the communities that lived in that area or used the beach in that area. So I think that's important to include that as well.
So, and it just simply, and the need to protect it, and the users of the beach environment, or something to that effect.
Yeah. Mr. Moore, very brief comment from you in terms of, are you satisfied with where this has landed?
Yeah, look, I thank the committee and council for taking this on board, and the seriousness of which it is, and the divisiveness that has been created, for right or wrong, but it has highlighted and focused people's attention on an issue which really does need some resolution. And I think we can find a solution that will be supported by both sides, and with education and understanding from those who see the right to drive wherever they want, yet they have plenty of access to drive wherever they want on the south side, right through to Peka Peka for many kilometres. They might see that this small area could have great potential for the greater community. And I commend this committee and these resolutions, and we hope that over the next few months that we might be able to achieve what we really want to do as a council, and believing that we are a coastline which has great environmental credentials. Because at the moment, I think taking the blocks away, although it is calmed and reset, as Mayor Janet has said, it has shown that you can go and drive through there now, and you can drive through there and do what you like. And of course, we don't want that example to prevail, but I would hope that through this resolution we can move forward and eventually bring it back to a full council and enforce this and enjoy what this area should become.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Councillor Coe.
I would like to add something in there about a communications plan or strategy. It's one thing putting up solutions and making some decisions around that, but this is a major communications exercise, and I think that needs to be really carefully thought through as to what we communicate and how we do that.
So would you like another point?
Well, I think it comes under F, that staff will consider a range of options and potential solutions to bring to the board along with a communications strategy and plan or something.
So in relation to that, do you think it's actually probably something before that? I don't know whether about something before that needs to occur, because I suppose the outcome from this subcommittee is that we are actually going to devise a plan to resolve this matter rather than just waiting until the 28th of this month.
I think that's where the hui will be.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, as part of the communication strategy, we need to let people know that it's going to be a matter for discussion at the community board.
Okay.
So your communication strategy probably needs to be looked at now in relation to that whole process, because people will be rather peeved if they realise that it's been discussed at the community board and they weren't aware of it.
Yes, yep, okay. Thank you. So, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, I just think, I think these are great resolutions. It's fantastic. In terms of the communication strategy, that's not saying that you're going to do communications ahead of the community board meeting. That's saying you're going to go to the community board meeting with a plan to do communications. I've got two concerns around that. First, you're not communicating ahead of the meeting. And the second concern I have is that actually doing a full communication strategy around this for approval for the 28th of February is quite a tight timeline, actually, in terms of a proper council strategy. So I would suggest that there's a separate motion, J, that notes that something more about notes that there will need to be robust communications and engagement around this issue, something like that. And then we know that we'll do it, but it just gives us a bit of flexibility in terms of how that's going to be delivered. Because the community board also might like to have a little bit of input into how that happens longer term, rather than being presented with a paper.
Okay, last shout from anyone? Thank you. So, do we have a mover of these motions? Thank you. So all those in favour of, I'll take these motions all together, all those in favour of all these motions? Aye. Those against? Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for bringing this matter to the subcommittee. Thank you, everyone, for your input, and thank you very much to staff and the CE for your advice on this matter. So maybe, I don't know when our next meeting is.
I think the 14th of March, if I remember rightly. And I wonder if we make what we were going to have as our last agenda item, which was a discussion around what might fill this committee's time. I don't think we'll have any trouble. You know, you had essentially three agenda items today, and we've filled up. Madam Chair, if I may, maybe having that discussion first up at the 14th of March meeting, might enable us to provide at least a draft work program. And for the whole organisation that Chris and the team are pulling together, and it might better inform and able for this committee to prioritise their work. How does that work?
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Jefferson. So one of the things that I was going to do now, but I'm very conscious of the time, was having a conversation about our forward work program, and in terms of getting ideas from each of you about various things that could go on a list. Then we prioritise it, because I think you're probably getting the impression that there's probably a lot that we could do. So thank you very much for your participation and sticking out the whole meeting until 5 o'clock, when some of us have been here since 9 o'clock. Thank you very much for staff and all your supporting roles, and go home and have a nice evening. Thank you. Go and have a nice walk on the beach. Thank you.